Good evening. Thank you for joining us in person, and thank you, all those folks that are with us out in Zoom land. I will keep my comments brief as we have public comment, updates from Dr. Adley, and a full agenda. I will say, I have to say an incredible thank you to all those that were involved over the years, but it was just an incredible Friday Night Lights football game. I think it was the true feeling of our community out there watching our kids play a really great game. So it was fun to see that. I haven't been to really very many of those, so it was a great night for the community. I also want to thank First Selectman Stevenson, Chief Anderson, Dr. Adley, members of the board that helped with feedback on the community letter that went out last week. I think that was important based on the events that happened last week. I want to also thank the community for the thoughts, comments, and feedback over the events that happened last week. While challenging and disappointing for our school community in town, the Board of Education, our town leaders, our parents, everyone here at the board table, I know, are committed to developing the right plan while we all serve as role models and leaders for our students. We must continue to listen, learn, talk, and provide guidance. We must educate on diversity, prejudice, inclusion, and treat all people the way we would want to be treated as individuals. I also feel I have to caution again the use of social media to get the latest updates, hear what's going on, or look for what happened, and even discuss possible punishment. I think this is what makes social media dangerous. I think everyone has to keep in mind if and when incidents do happen, there are students, really children that are sometimes involved, and family members and other children of that potential family. This is where social media becomes negative and dangerous. And people must understand the privacy laws and FERPA laws protecting students in this information. So I just caution everyone out there. The goal should be first and foremost to help educate as a district and community, be role models, and provide support to those in need or facing crisis. We always look out for the social and emotional needs of our students, teachers, administration, and families every day. We will continue to work through this, and we will get this done together. So thank you. I will turn it over, Michelle, to public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face and/or name or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you're unmuted for public comments. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Jamison Riley, you are recognized and unmuted.
Hello. Hi, my name is Jamison Riley from 105 Holmes Ave, and my wife and I have 2 daughters at Holmes Elementary. Tonight, I would like to discuss the issue of mask choice. I know it's not directly on the agenda, but I do know some of these topics, health in particular, is being discussed later. 1.5 years into this pandemic, we know the risk for children to spread COVID and fatality among them is extraordinarily small. People following the science know germs can easily go through cloth masks and actually harbor more germs when not properly worn, as most young kids are incapable of doing. Kids sneeze in them, drop them on the floor, take them in the bathroom, drop them on the bathroom floor, and continue breathing in that all day long. You want me to believe that wearing an unproven piece of cloth covering their face is going to keep them safe from germs? Does it even sound like a remotely good hygienic or scientific idea? The masks are essentially a petri dish full of germs right in front of the place where germs enter your body. How ironically stupid. This obviously has nothing to do with keeping kids safe. I'm here to argue for my children as their parent that this is an experiment exerting control and dominance over my young children and getting them to comply with the people in charge. Our governor is okay with emergency mandates that are grooming children to stay quiet, follow the rules, and not be able to say no. There are a lot of adults complicit in forcing this on kids, and I refuse to be one of them. I'm here to tell you this is harming my children both physically and mentally. As another parent or board member, you do not have the right to tell me it's just the mask. You cannot provide proof that what you are requesting I do to my child is not harming them. However, here's the proof I have that forced mask wearing is harming my children. The eczema that has now worsened behind my daughter's ears where the mask was sitting causes her to scream when I have to apply prescription cream to those areas. The masks I throw up because they have been sucked on and anxiously holes are chewed through them. The headaches my daughter tells me she has when she gets home from school. The tiredness and irritability my children have after school. The inability to understand things that are said underneath masks, which is the reason why most elected leaders are allowed to take them off when speaking into microphones, as evidenced by my daughter now meeting her recent not meeting her recent grade level proficiency testing. This is most certainly harming her ability to learn properly. I can go on and on. The point is, only I am responsible for my children's well-being, and this is counterintuitive to keeping them healthy. My child should be in control of her body, and when she expresses physical distress from being forced to wear a mask, I listen, and I am here to stand up for her bodily rights. If you are a parent who is okay with your child wearing a mask all day at school without detrimental effects, that's wonderful. I'm happy for you, and we'll hope your children continue to stay healthy and happy, as we should want for all children in society, regardless of if they wear masks or not. Ironically, Connecticut is the Constitution state. This is the most certainly an infringement on children's civil liberties, and time will reveal what real damage has been done. Dr. Fauci could only hope that there wouldn't be long-term masking wearing effects children endured. Not very scientific at all. In the meantime, your job as educators and leaders is to represent all your children. So please represent my children. You need to follow through with Governor Lamont and take more action on behalf of my children and others. Restore parental choice. Let me unmask my children and receive the education they deserve. We ask that you have the courage to make the right choice for our children, not Hartford.
Thank you.
Tiffany O'Connor, you are recognized and unmuted.
Tiffany, you're muted. If you can unmute, please.
I'm sorry. Okay. Tiffany O'Connor, 48 Leeuwarden Road. Good evening. I'd like to share some experiences related to the graffiti incident last week. Last year, I was one of the co-chairs of the Darien High School Parents Association. The DHSPA hosted coffees for parents seeking connection and in some cases support. We hosted a New to Darien coffee, Parents of Remote Students coffee, and in June, we hosted a Parents of LGBTQIA Students coffee. We wanted to facilitate connection, and I thought it would even be celebratory of the seemingly tremendous progress from past years and the community's widespread support during Pride Month and Darien High School's Pride Week. Instead, it was heartbreaking to hear about one horrific incident after another. Acts of bullying, discrimination, hate in the high school cafeteria, hallways, and especially during athletic practices and competitive events, but never when teachers or coaches were nearby. Following the coffee, my co-chair, our incoming co-chairs, and I met with Principal Ellen Dunn and later with Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum, Chris Tramberg. We also discussed our concerns with the DHSPA's Executive Board and CDSP. All shared our concerns, and thankfully, several were already addressing such behavior. Since last June, I haven't stopped thinking about the incidents these parents shared with us. I worry about their kids and other kids who may feel scared and isolated in the middle of a pandemic that is already making so many kids anxious and depressed. I worry about the parents who were amazingly level-headed and calm as they shared their stories, but I know they're hurting as much as their kids are, maybe even more. To the parents who have expressed opposition to the pronoun education, please put yourself in these parents' shoes. I've learned from professionals that education, particularly through curriculum, is very effective in fostering a culture of acceptance, inclusivity, and respect. I'm not an expert, but it sounds like understanding pronouns is a step in this direction, and I trust the professionals. Please ask a teacher or counselor why something is being taught before opposing it. Maybe these assignments will prevent future acts of hate like the ones I mentioned. To the board, thank you to those who have spoken up and corrected misinformation. A lot of controversy was even caused by misinformation about assignment instructions, not even opinions about the assignment, the instructions. And I ask that all of you speak up and clarify the facts for the safety and well-being of all kids in the district. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Miss Julie Punishil, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hello, my name is Julie Punishil. One second. My name is Julie Punishil. I live at 23 Fitch Avenue. My title is Ms., and my preferred pronouns are she and her. I first want to sincerely thank Dr. Adley and the members of the board for the community message sent on September 24th. I have been deeply upset, angry, and sad over the events that have transpired in our community, not only over the last few weeks, but over the last few years. I greatly appreciate the sentiment and tone of the letter. I earnestly hope the strategic plan of equity, diversity, and inclusivity is quickly implemented and that the DEI team acts swiftly. There cannot be any delay. The children of the LGBTQIA+ community do not experience a safe learning environment and culture in our school system, and in particular on the athletic fields. Last week's vandalism is just the most recent incident that happened to get reported, as Tiffany has relayed, that we learned of in our coffee last June. When discussing the most recent incident with my daughter, who is a currently Darien High School senior, she said things like this happen all the time. That is not okay. At the gathering last spring, the parents of the children in the LGBTQIA+ community, I was shocked and saddened, just like Tiffany, to hear the story after story of bullying and outright violence happening in our schools. The children often do not report these said incidents for fear of backlash and even more unwanted attention. The tantamount tenet of our school system must be the safety of all students. As a self-appointed advocate for these children, I will be insisting on meetings with the administration to ensure proper mandatory programming is being brought to, especially for our teachers and our coaches, because as we know, the culture will change from the top. It will be us parents insisting on change. It will come from the teachers and the coaches. For other parents of any school-age child who identifies as part of the LGBTQIA+ community, I invite you to a brown bag lunch gathering we will be hosting at the picnic tables at Pear Tree Point Beach at noon this coming Friday, October 1st. Let us come together as a community to support one another. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Kate Bates, you are recognized and unmuted.
Am I on?
You're on.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. Is my video started? Wait, hang on. Sorry. This is my first time on Zoom. Good evening, Dr. Adley, members of the board. My name is Kate Bates, and I live at 33 Ridgely Street. I wanted to speak again this evening on behalf of the almost 200 parents who have signed a letter which began circulating today to request increased transparency and board oversight of curriculum in our district. We hope you will vote tonight to establish a board member curriculum subcommittee and also request that you discuss and find a way to incorporate the community at the district curriculum committee level. We, parents, believe there should be greater transparency and accountability for what our children are being shown and taught in our schools. After hearing about several district and separate incidents across grade levels and subjects, we feel the board desperately needs to discuss and clearly state its expectations for instruction in this district. I think we all agree that our children should be taught how to think, not what to think. Some of these incidents appear to have crossed that line, and we would like to see you establish both a protocol and policy to correct and prevent that from happening in the future. We won't stand for the indoctrination of our children. Schools should be inclusive, safe places to learn and share ideas. Diversity of thought is as important as diversity of any other kind, and we need to support and encourage it in every classroom and every day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Paul Salmore, you are recognized and unmuted.
I wasn't.
Hello. Unfortunately, it's not Paul, it's his wife, Emily Salmore. I live at 3 Berry Lane, and thank you for hearing my thoughts. I would first like to address the issue of civility in the Board of Education meetings. I have been troubled since the Board of Education meeting on September 14th during which two individuals made derogatory comments over other participants' actions. To paraphrase the comments, I noticed a small group of parents standing outside the Board of Ed meeting. They didn't seem to know why they were there. I asked one person why they were there, and they told me someone texted and told me to come. Another said, I thought it was a rally, but then I realized it was just a coffee. These comments, as I perceive them, are made to discredit and devalue the opinions and actions of others. We must all be entitled to our opinions and to organize as we see fit without fear of being shamed or called out by our fellow Darien parents. I would ask board members to remind all participants that we must respect each other's actions and opinions with respect to Board of Education concerns, even if we do not agree with them. Secondly, it's very troubling to hear what's going on in our schools with respect to the solicitation of our children's sexual identities. I'm referring specifically, in this case, to the Silver Team Culture Survey that was distributed at Middlesex Middle School on September 14th of this year. This survey, in part, asked children to check boxes for age 10, 11, or 12, and then asked them to select from a range of boxes labeled male, female, non-binary, other, in a section titled Gender Identity. I'm particularly disturbed at the lack of proper oversight that enabled this survey to reach our young children. Our children at this age are very much minors, and their sexual identities are not yet defined or even relevant to them. I'm incredulous that someone would think it's okay not only to ask this question of children this age, but then present them with the multiple choice answer options regarding their sexual identities as if they are checking a box for their favorite color. This type of overstep is not only confusing for our children, it's completely inappropriate, in my opinion. I believe our schools must be ready to fully support and accommodate any student whose parents have contacted the students to report that their student's sexuality may be defined in a non-traditional way as non-binary or transgender. Our school community has an obligation, as we do with any student, to ensure that a child's growth is nurtured in the way that best serves the child. Our schools must always foster a sense of mutual respect among students for one another's identity and choices. That said, it is not the job of our schools.
Time is almost up. Thank you.
Okay. It is not the job of our schools or teachers to solicit such information from our young children. The question remains is what recourse do parents or families have in current environment to address concerns over age sensitivity, content and textbook sourcing, and changes in curriculum?
Thank you very much. Your time is up. Thank you for your
Thank
comment.
you for hearing me. Thank you very much.
Natasha Rose, you are unmuted and recognized. I apologize, I turned off your video.
Hi, I'm Natasha Tomei, and I live at 6 McLaren Road South. And I'm here to commend the board for re-evaluating a curriculum committee at this meeting. My hope is that there will be a vote tonight on reassembling a committee and putting that in place. I think that there has been widespread concern over the cart before the horse and putting things out there that haven't been properly researched, discussed, talked about with the community. There are 2 slides on the Board of Ed website that are talking about the DEI initiatives that show the parents on the very outside or at the very end of the cycle of these curriculums being developed. And so I ask the board, as you decide tonight or at a future meeting, hopefully prior to elections, because I think it is our right as parents to know where our elected officials now stand on these matters, that you think about where the parents are in this hierarchy and that the parents are concerned and we want to be included in this, in these initiatives. If we're not included in the initiatives, they're not going to be successful. We have to know what's going on. We have to be a part of it. We want to be a part of it. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone that participated in public comment this evening.
Duke.
Yes.
We didn't do.
Oh, yep. Thank you. We did backwards. We mixed it up a little bit. Now we'll go to in-person public comment. Thank you.
First, thank you, Mr. Deneen, for your statement. Opening
you,
the
Ann.
meeting.
My name is Ann Reed. I live at 15 Libby Lane. I am a member of the RTM Education Committee, but I speak only for myself tonight. Like so many in our community, I was horrified by the graffiti found in the boys' bathroom and the social media posts made by a high school student last week. Community leaders have rightfully condemned those actions, and I hope the students involved face consequences for their actions. I hope that those who are victimized by these acts can see that the vast majority of our community supports them. These events made me think a lot about the vision of the graduate that was voted on by all but one of the members of the Board of Ed on June 22nd this year. Darien has obviously done an outstanding job on academics and athletics. I have been watching Board of Ed meetings since 2007, and I have seen the initiation of many wonderful academic programs for all levels of students. It was gratifying to see the focus in the last few years on social emotional learning and understanding of the need for mental health professionals in our schools. The committee on the vision of the graduate that worked for months to distill the qualities that Darien should expect of its graduates was right on target. The statement read in part, Darien Public Schools recognize the need to identify through this vision the skills and dispositions required to raise compassionate, resilient problem solvers and leaders, communication, creativity, curiosity, empathy, independence, and integrity. There was a discussion before adopting the vision of the graduate regarding what were the metrics and measurements of these subjective qualities. A math test results in a grade. How do you measure compassion and integrity? To quote Mr. Maroney, how to be a good citizen of the world. The students in our town need to be able to see beyond Darien, to see outside themselves to the myriad of complicated people and situations that they may encounter at college and beyond. To echo the comments of Sophia Tallwalker, a recent graduate who spoke at the last BOE meeting, one thing she wasn't taught in her 18 years in the Darien Public Schools was about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would hope that one measure of teaching capacity and compassion and integrity to our students would be the elimination of these kinds of incidents in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Hi, my name is Lori Olson. I live at 16 Littlebrook Road North. I am co-chair of CDSP, the Council of Darien School Parents. My comment tonight is regarding the Curriculum Committee. In light of all the discussions we are having regarding transparency and collaboration, we hope there's an opportunity for public discussion once we have heard more about the proposed committee's charter and mandates, what work product the committee expects to complete, and what decisions the board plans to make based on that work. Again, we hope to hear a robust discussion tonight, but we ask you to delay action until the next meeting so the entire public can have a chance to weigh in on this decision after hearing more. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Sarusi. I live at 12 Rings End Road, and I have two seniors at Darien High School. My family and I are deeply saddened by the recent acts of vandalism and hateful language expressed by one or more persons at Darien High School this week. These despicable acts and the hate crime that was committed should not be considered harmless acts by kids being kids or kids that just didn't know any better. Our daughters were objectified and shamed. Our Jewish students were ridiculed, and our LGBTQIA+ students were victimized and scared that an individual in their building, their school, their safe haven would like to see them dead. No student or staff member in our public schools should be discriminated against, made to feel inferior or unsafe. This all happened in 1 week, and it's an escalation of the bullying, harassment, and discriminatory acts directed towards students on a regular basis due to color, ethnicity, religion, gender, and sexual preference. We recognize that these hateful words do not reflect the opinions of our overwhelming majority of students and community. But unfortunately, the voices of those few who are prejudiced and bigoted have created a significant harm to our community. We need to come together now as a community to end this. We do not expect our school administrators and teachers to be responsible for our students' actions, but we do expect that our district will address this problem and there are things that that can be done immediately, such as working with our parents to develop and implement an effective DEI curriculum. We do not have time to wait until next quarter, next year, or any time in the future. We need this now. Consider a mandatory diversity and inclusion meeting similar to the mandatory commitment meetings already offered at the high school, where students and parents attend and students commit to abide by a code of ethics in order to participate in school activities. And finally, as parents, we need to come together and recognize that our own words and actions influence our children. Communication about diversity starts at home, and we each need to take responsibility for our children's behavior. Encourage your children to learn more about their peers of different color, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual preference, and those with disabilities. Encourage them to join one of the high school clubs that promote community and inclusion. And let's all just work harder to be ambassadors for diversity, respect, and kindness within our community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Amy Zerby, and I live at 9 Morehouse Drive. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am sharing my pronouns to show my support and respect for the LGBTQ community. Believe it or not, I was in the middle of writing this speech when I received the email from the high school alerting parents to the homophobic graffiti found in the boys' bathroom. The truth is that there are many occurrences of anti-LGBTQ behavior in the high school, rather than the few isolated incidents that some would like to believe. Diversity, inclusion, and LGBTQ topics fit nicely within the social emotional learning that Darien has been implementing over several years. Social emotional learning is not an a la carte menu. We in Darien highly value strong mental health in our schools and have asked for your support. You have delivered. People who identify as LGBTQ are nearly 3 times more likely to develop a mental health disorder, such as depression or anxiety, and significantly more likely to attempt suicide and abuse substances. The risks are especially high for young people. Those between the ages of 10 and 24 are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. Including topics concerning LGBTQ in the social emotional learning framework before the students enter high school will not only help those who identify and often struggle with their identity, but will also lead to more acceptance within the community. We would hopefully have fewer incidents of LGBTQ hatred within the schools and the Darien community. I've asked a few LGBTQ high schoolers about their thoughts on teaching gender and sexual identity in middle school. They have said that it would have helped clarify what they were feeling. Why would you choose to exclude this particular group from benefiting from our school's mental health programs? To be clear, you cannot make a person gay and you cannot convert someone to be heteronormative. A person simply is. There are many students who identify as LGBTQ in the Darien public school community, from the elementary schools through the high school. For some of these children, it is a struggle to tell their parents, and some choose not to. You can see why anxiety and depression are so prevalent in this community. As you are aware, there have been lively and divisive discussions on diversity, inclusion, and LGBTQ topics. I fear that people will want to sweep this latest incident under the rug, as some people prefer discussing social issues only in the home. It is disheartening to see people in opposition to something that will improve our school community. Some say that these topics should be limited to discussing within the home, but this is not working and never has worked. I challenge you to find an example in history.
You are almost at time.
Where a community-wide issue was resolved by only discussing the issue within the home. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, everyone in the audience. And again, thank you, everyone online. Any hands raised online, Michelle?
Not at this time, Mr.
Thank
Denny.
you, Michelle. We will move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Adley.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your participation, both online and in person. I too would like to reiterate a few of those comments made by the board chair, that the incidents of the past week do not represent the values of our student body, school district, or our town. And the message to those involved remains unequivocal that there is no places for vandalism, sentiments of hate, bigotry, anti-Semitism, or discrimination of any kind in our schools and greater community. Yes, it continues to be disappointing because the periodic behaviors are disturbing and unacceptable. There are also complex social issues and not simply school issues. They also require a thoughtful and strategic response. I would agree that as educators, parents, and community members, it is important that we collectively serve as role models for our children, providing guidance through our actions and words on issues of diversity, prejudice, and inclusion. At the dinner table, I ask all our parents to have developmental, appropriate conversations with your children around these difficult topics and issues. Yes, in the days and months ahead, we will continue our efforts to thoughtfully educate by providing our students voice through partnerships with outside organizations such as the National Conference for Community and Justice, the Anti-Defamation League for Educational Programming, and through the district strategic plan, and finally by outreach into the greater community for assistance and participation. That most recently, as we look as to what are we doing in response, I will give you a couple of just frameworks, really. We have in the past worked with certain organizations. We have administratively contacted those organizations, the Anti-Defamation League and NCCJ, National Council for Community and Justice. We have a town-wide call to action in the sense of this is not just a school system, right? This is a town-wide issue to be addressed. So we must work at that particular level and re-engage at that particular level, which will include officials, community members, and town officials, right? And actual school employees also. So we will re-engage in that. If you remember the history of that, we had engaged at that particular level, and along came the pandemic, and we could say that it shouldn't have put a stop to it, but that is where it ended at that particular time. It's time to re-engage in that collectively with the unified voice around these particular issues. We also have the strategic plan, and I commend and understand comments about we must act now. I understand that, but the strategic plan is a way of going about this in a strategic, thoughtful way. Yes, if it has to be expedited, well, we will consider that. We have a lot going on simultaneously, but also what are we doing now? Right? There has to be a response and an ongoing response. We have talked with the Anti-Defamation League and NCCJ administratively, and we are looking at different types of frameworks to potentially bring to the schools, both the high school, middle school, elementary school, but we're not just going to jump aboard one of those without really serious contemplation and reflection, because that would be a mistake. Doing one-time things isn't going to work, particularly at the high school at the moment, around these particular issues. We've met with our district school climate coordinator. The administration will be working with the school climate committee and student leaders of various organizations and athletic teams. And then we'll be putting together a program for the next regularly scheduled or before advisor-advisee program as a immediate response to this. But we need to have some ongoing immediacy. So I'll share that I think this is sort of like three phases. This one, immediately. Two, strategically, how are we addressing it? And three, as a townwide. That is how I would like to address that. That is kind of what the structure is sort of set up to be. Yes, we have to respond immediately to these issues, but that's not going to immediately fix them. So those would be the approaches that we would use, and some of those are already in place. Others we have to engage in. But for the immediacy at the high school, working with the climate committee and the students to have a voice in this for the planning of a response to the full school body, we thought was the most thoughtful way, engaging way to respond in time. So that's a little bit of an update to the community and our board on how we are responding administratively to the issue. I would like to thank First Student. There was discussions about bus drivers not showing up on Monday, and First Student has done a tremendous job for us throughout the pandemic and also really throughout the past couple of school years and doing whatever it takes. I'm pleased to say that the First Student employees were all vaccinated or engaging in the weekly testing. And I thank them for that because there was no disruption to the educational process or to the transportation. So it seems that the governor is extending the executive order that has gone through the House and it's gone through the Senate. We haven't received official word from him or from the office. I would anticipate we would, but it seems that executive order is extended into next February. So with that, then the mask requirement would actually still be in place. We did send out this week the individual assessments for students. That is on the board report for next time up. And the next meeting is for the facilities subcommittee, which I believe is the 14th of October.
Any board questions or comments?
I don't know what
I think it's important that we open it up to.
protocol is, but I did have a question on your discussion on the implementation.
Sure.
I was one of the people who sent the email in saying I thought we should sort of have a two-pronged approach, something immediate and then strategic. And I think having high schoolers, hearing from high school parents, hearing from high school students, aside from the letter that was sent out to parents, which kids aren't going to read, the high school students haven't been addressed about these incidents. And I'm slightly disappointed in that. I think we have a moment we have a captive audience, and just to acknowledge what happened, that it's unacceptable. We don't tolerate it. We expect better. Even a message over the loudspeaker during the day to stop class for the day and say, this is not okay. We have to do better here. And the students haven't gotten anything, and they're the ones we're trying to reach. So I appreciate the strategic plan, but we're almost a week out and nothing has been said to the student body. And I think it should be said in school, in person, take a moment from class. I feel very strongly about it.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. Mrs. Ackman.
So I'd like to follow up on that. I hear you say there needs to be an immediate response, a strategic response, and a community response, but what is the immediate response?
So to my knowledge that there was an announcement made, so I'll have to clarify, did they address all of the issues or did they address just some of the issues? So to my knowledge that took place, but we can check on that. The immediate response, we did not want to just bring somebody in to do an assembly or something like that, right? Our immediate response is to meet with the climate committee, with our district climate coordinator and our administration and student leaders. It's important that the students have a voice in this, and that we're not just telling kids you just can't do this or otherwise and just talk down to them. It's important that over time here we really have their voice be magnified in this, and also to have a real participatory role. I would like to make sure that was done in a real way. This is an immediate response, so it's quicker in that regard, but to sustain these things, we're going to need to sustain their participation and presence around these issues over time. And just taking programs and putting them in place with really just not strategically or coherently isn't going to serve the purpose. We also have our staff, right? We have to train our staff in all these issues that they haven't been trained in these. That doesn't mean to say we don't do anything with them. I will say this too, on all of these issues, all of the discussions we have going on now doesn't make that any easier, but I'll just recognize that, but it doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be done and can't be done. But to do it, we have to do it in a thoughtful, planned way, a coherent way, a way that actually prepares the staff to actually talk to the children when they actually get there around these particular issues. So, well, that's the response.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so I also tried to get this on the agenda for tonight and was too late in doing so. But I think there's and I really appreciate the three-pronged approach. I think it's the right way to do this, and taking 24 hours after I sent an email to the chair probably made me think that it's better to take some time and understand and do this in a proper way as opposed to a knee-jerk reaction. But I think my question is, what can we expect as a time frame for these plans? Is this 6 months? Is it a month? What is our time frame?
So the strategic plan outlines the time frame year by year. So that's pretty, if that wants to be expedited because of something, we just have to understand that there's other things that are going to give in that particular perspective. This immediate issue and response will be done before the next advisee, if not before. So that's basically 8 days, I think, 8 school days. But if not, it will be done before then. I will have to re-engage our public officials, engage with the board also in terms of the greater community, how to re-engage that and reactivate that, and how people would like to proceed with that. So that's not a quick thing. That takes time to actually get up and running. But I mean, I'll do that as quickly as I possibly can. It's not something to be kicked down the road, but I need to contact people and people who are on that committee, and I've already contacted the NCCJ and ADL to see if we can get facilitation for that. But I also want to make sure that is what we want to do.
Mrs. Ackman.
Sorry, just one more brief comment. To take on Mrs. Stein and Mr. Maroney's comments, I appreciate there's a more thoughtful plan here. And I am probably the biggest advocate for bringing kids along and understanding where kids are. But there is a point where there are, as people said, children involved here, and we are the adults. I believe our staff is trained to say homophobia and anti-Semitism is wrong. And I think while we do not do the day-to-day operations of the school, I think certainly as a board table, we can say that publicly. I'll speak for myself, but I wouldn't exclude any of my board members from feeling the same. And I do think in immediate action, I would go a step further than Mrs. Stein. I don't think an announcement over the loudspeaker is enough. And I do think some things you just say no to, and then you say, I'm going to follow up, we're committed to this. I think the strategic plan deals with diversity, inclusion, and equity. We are talking about 2 very specific instances. And in the case of anti-Semitism, we've seen repeated incidences over the years. So it's disappointing we don't have a plan in place, because it's not like we've never experienced this before. And it's not like we haven't experienced it in recent history. So I would just like, maybe at the next board meeting at the latest, and hopefully in between, that the board is fully flushed out on what the plan is. We're going to talk about a curriculum committee tonight. And I think if we're going to get into the ins and outs and intricacies of resources and curriculum, we certainly should be knowing what's going on with these types of issues as well.
Thank you. I will say categorically that, of course, the staff would take a position to say no to these things, and I do believe that comment has been made and made clear to students. That certainly you don't have to. It doesn't take much to do that, and you should certainly say that. But I respectfully say that in itself isn't enough. But yes, but I believe it has been done and said accordingly.
Mrs. McCammon.
I agree that with you that there is something of a tiered approach. I think when we're looking at attitudinal changes, those certainly take time, they require seeds, and they require a long, thoughtful discussion. I think sometimes, though, what I was wondering as I was thinking about this is behaviorally, sometimes we can take the opportunity to reinforce behavioral standards, whether we have someone come and talk to the school about hate speech and what that looks like and what the legal implications are, or something like that. If we keep it fairly black and white, but focus on the behavior in the short term, that could just be something that we could do more quickly that wouldn't require some of the same long-term approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Any other comments from the board? I will add, again, from myself, I think if we don't do something this week, we're missing an opportunity. I appreciate all the comments around the board table. I do think the teachers, the administrators, us, we are the adults. While they are young adults in the high school, in the later grades, we are the adults. I don't think an announcement cuts it. I think a visit to the auditorium, even if it's reading the community letter that went out to the parents, to the students, might have an effect on it. But I think more can be done in the short term. And I would like to actually hear and see more that's going to be done this week for these students to understand the gravity of the issues. All right, thank you.
Can I just make, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it cuts it either. I don't think any of our employees think it cuts it. I just want to make that clear. But yes, thank you, sir.
All right, we will move on to the, thank you again for all the comments and the conversations around it. A lot more work to do here and a lot more work that needs to be done, I think, this week. Approval of minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting, executive session, and regular meeting held on September 14th, 2021?
So moved.
Mr. Maroney, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous for all those people that are here. Thank you. Mr. Brown, are you good? Sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you.
Yes, I'm good.
Good. And I'm sorry, did you have any comments, Mr. Brown?
No.
Okay.
No,
Thanks, Dave. I was keeping my eye on you, then I let it down.
No worries, Duke. You'll hear me. Don't worry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We will move on to board committee reports. Mrs. Stein.
The policy committee met 2 Fridays ago on September 17th. We have a batch of our first group of policies we're reviewing for a first read on tonight to be discussed later.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. Any other, Mrs. Achman?
The finance committee met last Thursday to review the opening month's finances. Mr. Rudel will do the full report, but I think we had a good review of all the data. Thank you.
Good, thank you. A quick update on Ox Ridge, and Dr. Adley can add in here too, as we spent some time on this over the last week. As you all know, there continue to be problems with production, with supply, with all that good stuff all across the country. We have been incredibly lucky with the Ox Ridge build in that some of the contractors actually ordered ahead of time, including steel and other type of things that needed to be sourced. However, we did run into an issue with insulation, and we ran into an insulation in the roof. And so that caused a 4-week delay. The good news is, based on the insulation we were looking for, we were able to get it in 4 weeks. Some of the other insulation products are going out to January, which would have really changed the whole scope of the project. Through the building committee, meeting with Rusty, Kip, and myself with the contractors, Rusty Schreiner and myself met with the superintendent to go over potential options to keep the project moving forward. The good news is the project is on schedule for completion, and it continues to be under budget. The change that the building committee has recommended is that the move-in date move from the April break of 2022 to June. So have a summer move-in. Which Luke Forshaw and the principal and Dr. Adley all agree makes sense. The project will continue in terms of getting that academic wing done, and then it'll enable them to immediately start demoing the old school as soon as the principals in the classrooms get moved over. So we will order the furniture for an April move-in because there are production and supply issues with furniture. But we have been told if we order it now, which it's being worked on from a committee standpoint, we'll be ready to go in June. So again, no changes to the ed specs or anything like that. We are working through a potential change in the lighting and the windows on the gymnasium side that continues to work through the building committee. The good news around that, no real financial impact on that. And that's kind of the way we're trying to look at it. The cost of moving the move-in date from April to June will be somewhere in the range of $91,000 to $120,000 in overtime, just to keep the project on course. It seems like the best option. We could move the whole project back, which would actually be 2 months based on the month we lost and the month that has to be made up in terms of how they work construction schedules. So we feel, I'm just bringing to the board to inform them that the move date will go from an April spring break move to end of school year. We'll literally start to move into that building the day after school closes. Any questions or comments? I think it's a good thing. Again, we're on track for completing and delivering the school in the time frame, and it continues to be under budget. Good. Thank you.
I would just say, Mr. Chairman, that
yes,
in general, it's actually probably a better plan because I'm not sure the collective mind, myself included, when we were looking at the time frame to move in a week, is just a significant challenge. So it's going to alleviate a lot of that pressure.
I think we have such faith in Mr. Lynch. But it's a good thing. Mr. Lynch is in agreement also. All right, moving along. Presentations and discussions. Darien Public Schools status update, Dr. Adley.
And I believe we have our Director of Nursing with us this evening, Alicia. Alicia, you online?
Yep, there she is.
I'm here.
Okay. So some of the things that where we are at the moment, I'll give you a couple of COVID metrics. A quick update on elementary school contact tracing. Alicia's going to talk about some of the testing clinics, teacher vaccinations, and sort of where we are with the American Rescue Act IDA. So this is kind of for the corresponding dates of 11th of September, town of Darien. This was just put in just to give you a sense of the state of Connecticut in general. It's 2.15 positivity rate. This is kind of where we are as a district. We basically have had about 5 a week type thing. As you may have seen through, we reinstated the communication that whenever something happens, we tell everybody now, just to keep a sense that it was hard to keep track of a little bit for people to spot a pattern or otherwise. So we've reinstituted that communication. And recently we've had a couple of elementary COVID cases, and we've been able to reduce some of the quarantining that's needed to take place. I will caution that it may not be always that way, particularly if it's haven't been in the kindergarten classes today. Like those young kids and small kids are literally all over the place, but the teachers are doing a phenomenal job trying to do the instructional practices that we want them to do as normal as possible, but also keeping them in some sort of pod situation, cohort situation as best as possible. For September, the Darien month, town of Darien for 22 people. If anybody was watching last night, you would have seen that the vaccination rate is over 90% for the town, collective age groups. So here you can see the weekly sort of 5. So it actually is about 5 a week at this particular point. Alicia, I'm sorry about that. Alicia can talk a little bit about the testing for parents. So we're ready to go with that, and we have the date ready, and we have the information ready to go. So that's going to start next week. But Alicia, do you want to just give a wee update on that, please?
Sure. So Progressive Diagnostics, which is based out of Norwalk, is going to be doing our testing, and that will take place on Tuesdays in the mornings. There will be 2 teams that will go out to the 6 schools. So one team will go to 3 schools. The other
Alicia, I don't know if it's
you
your
can't
mic
hear me.
or us, but you're coming across very mumbled. So I don't know if there's any adjustments we can make because it's important information.
Hold on.
Thank you.
Let me try another spot in the house. Maybe it's where I am. Is this any better?
Yes, it is.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sorry. So there's 2 teams that'll go out to the 6 schools. They'll start in the morning, so they'll be done about noon. And what will happen is the families that have opted in to the testing, their children will be called down to the location. We're still determining those for each school, where the Progressive Diagnostic team will do the anterior nasal swab. The swab only goes up about 1/2 of an inch into the nose, so it's not that deep nasal swab that we were all, or if you had to experience the COVID test in the beginning, this is a very shallow nasal swab that they'll use. And the tests will be pooled together in groups of 5. If there is a positive that shows up in that pool testing, then they will do reflex testing on each swab. There's markers on them, so they'll know which swab was positive. It'll take a little bit longer to get those results. They won't report the positive result until they know which swab is positive. So if you get a result back in the first 24 hours and it's negative, that means the pool testing that you were in is negative. And then if it takes a little bit longer, it could mean that somebody's in that pool testing was positive, and we just have to wait and see. So within 24 to 48 hours from the testing on Tuesdays, we will know from the pool testing if there's any positive cases, and then
then we'll do notification, and the contact tracing will happen after that. Parents will be able to access the results online, and also the school district, I will know who's positive, and then we'll start contact tracing from there. So that's it about the testing. And then just, cases, like Dr. Adley said, we're seeing about 5 a week or so. And, I think that the level of vaccination across the district has helped quite a bit. Hopefully, with the vaccination of younger students, we'll see even less cases and less quarantining needs across the district.
So we have about 5% of the staff who are participating in the weekly testing, and the others are fully vaccinated. Our contract workers are also compliant as they're required to do. Any other contractors who have contact with kids hereafter who are being hired cannot participate in the weekly testing, so they actually have to be vaccinated. So we'll monitor that as we go. The American Rescue Act, it's just over the 200,000, the 218,000 at the moment. It would just be under the contracted services for OT, PT, and speech. That's not completely defined yet as a proposal, but it's likely it'll be of that nature that we'll bring back here for you to see as a proposal.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. I'll open up to board questions and comments. Mr. Sini.
Alicia, could you talk to us about the new protocols, the 7-day protocols, and how that's working out, whether or not you're seeing a backlog for the quarantines, or you're being able to handle the volume in the processing of the 7-day versus the 10-day? Thank you.
That seems to be working pretty well. I will say at homes, because we had to quarantine so many kids in those initial cases that we had there, I think, and the 5-day testing window with return on day 8, it was about 70 kids. So that was a lot to manage, but my nurse was fantastic and she did it. And but we haven't seen that level since then. So I think it's pretty manageable at this point. If things start to change, we may find it to be a little bit more cumbersome, but it seems to be working okay.
Thank you. Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. Alicia, can you remind parents and myself how to have their children opt into testing and how we get them signed up?
So we sent out several emails that had the link that you can sign the consent form online. Also, I believe that is on the reopening page, the link to the testing consent form. And then if you are not able to access that online, each nursing office has a consent form that you can sign. If you're not signed up and you want to get signed up, it's not too late. They do progressive diagnostics to make it consistent, really wants people to stay in it. But if there's a week you don't want your child tested or you want them tested every other week, you can opt for that. We just have to have clear communication from parents about what their expectation is.
Yes, Mrs. Parent.
Do you have any idea how many families have signed up so far to this point?
Yesterday, when I looked at it, there was 216 students signed up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Any other questions or comments about the reopening and the testing? Yes, Mrs. McCammon.
I have an academic question. I know the SBAC scores got back to parents this week. Of course, anything I would have is anecdotal, but I am hearing about some parents receiving unexpected results. When are we going to hear at the board level about both what the results were and then maybe not immediately what an action plan might be if we see any variability?
It's scheduled for the next board meeting.
The testing results?
Yes.
So that includes SBAC?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
Great.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you all. We will move along to discussion on thriving youth, the survey results. Ms. Shelley Sheridan, Ms. Emily Larkin, and Mr. Mitch Dickey are with us.
I think our friends are remote from a Thriving Youth, and this is a survey that have been given a couple of times in the district about different assets and behaviors of students. I want to thank Shelley, Emily, and Mitch. Mitch is the statistician involved, and there is a a community presentation of this in October at the middle school. So here they're going to give us some highlights of it and what potentially next steps are in that particular process. But thank you for your work. As I look at some of you online here a little bit, I think I'll just turn it over to Emily first of all. Emily, to just sort of lead off, but I do see Shelley and Mitch online. So welcome, and the floor is yours, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually going to be Shelley that starts.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Thank you to the Board of Education for having us tonight, and specifically to Dr. Adley and the public schools for helping us administer this survey amidst a global pandemic. Shelley Sheridan. I'm a parent of a freshman at the high school and a 7th grader at Middlesex, and I'm a board member of the Thriving Youth Task Force at the Community Fund of Darien. Tonight, as Dr. Adley mentioned, you're going to learn about our findings around substance use and mental health. So we're going to split it up a little bit. I'm going to be covering the findings around substance use. Emily will cover the mental health, and I'm going to introduce Mitch to set the stage of our survey methodology. And just a few reminders before we start. There's a lot of content. As Dr. Adley mentioned, we're just going to hit the highlights. There is going to be an extensive community presentation on October 20th. The survey was given to the students, over 2,000 took it. It was anonymous, and they were asked to self-identify their gender. And parents also had the option to opt their children out of taking the survey if they weren't comfortable for whatever reason of any of the content. So at this point, I want to introduce Mitch Dickey, who is our genius statistician. He's a licensed psychologist and has his PhD in psychology from Yale. He's nationally recognized for his research in emotional intelligence. And he's also working with a similar coalition in Greenwich on similar survey. So I'm going to have Emily switch it to the next slide and
I'm
turn
so
it over
sorry
to
to
Mitch.
interrupt you, Shelley. I'm unable, I was going to share for everyone on Zoom the slide deck, but I'm unable to share my screen. I'm not sure if the host might be able to allow me to screen share.
Yes.
We are going to figure that out. Hold on just a second.
Okay.
There you are.
There.
You should be able to share now.
Try sharing now, Emily.
Thank you so much.
Great, you're set.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Mitch, it's all you.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you about this. Darien has actually implemented these surveys every few years since 2008. And in those surveys, we had we've done 3 different things this year that I think helped the survey. In the past years, there have been 2 separate surveys, one about what's been going on with the students and in their lives and things, and then second one about substance use. But that meant that we couldn't relate what was going on in their lives to their use. And so we combined the surveys to be able to do that this year. Secondly, we added several sections of the survey that kind of represented what really mattered to students, their peers, the family, stress, mental health, that kind of thing. So we could get a broader and more holistic view of the student. And then the third thing that we did was we did a different set of analyses, and I'll describe that to you briefly. In 2018, we got what you call descriptive statistics, which means that you could tell from the survey responses, this percentage of the students said this percentage of the students said that, and it kind of gave you an overview of what the survey said. But that doesn't really allow you to understand what drives those risky behaviors, what kind is causing the student behaviors. And we were able to do that this year based on these newer statistics. There are 307 items in the survey. And if you just do one simple correlation matrix, that's 90,000 cells, and it's impossible to kind of get any meaning out of that. So we needed a way to reduce that complexity. And we wanted to shine a spotlight on the data rather than a floodlight that kind of cast a pale over everything. So we clustered students into groups, meaningful groups. About this set of students has these core, common, and crucial concerns and behaviors. And that's we did that clustering for substance use and for mental health. And in essence, that kind of matches up with the unit of intervention or programming that you can design based on these X. Essentially, it just makes the survey much more actionable. And then once we formed these groups of clusters of kids, we said, okay, well, now we want to understand what's driving it. So we used what's called decision tree analysis to do that. And essentially, that is legitimately an artificial intelligence statistic. It is machine learning. It may not be the fanciest in the world, but it is legitimately AI. And I think it's correct to say that, I don't know, but this may be the only time or the first time that these kinds of analyses have been used with this kind of survey. So Darien is on the leading edge of this thing. And the benefit of using these techniques is it can make what's invisible in the data, what would be almost impossible to see outside of using these techniques, more visible. And as you'll see in a moment, it did work. So I'll pass it across to, is it Shelley Sheridan first, or is it you, Emily?
Yes, back to Shelley. Thank you, Mitch. If Emily goes to the next slide, you'll just see, I'm just reiterating a bit here of what Mitch said. This is different than our presentations in the past where we just were giving statistical information on who said yes to what. This is really trying to understand and using this AI technology and get more insight into why, so that we can actually use the information and conclusions in the survey to make it actionable for our schools, our community, to make our community a better place. So if we go to the next one, we all know that this was taken in the middle of a pandemic in February when people were at home. So to look at substance use, we need to take that into account. So it's probably not surprising for most to see that our use is reportedly down. So if you look at the graph, gray is 2021. So across all forms, e-cigarettes, alcohol, and marijuana use was reportedly down. And I think there's a lot of anecdotal reasons that we could see. People weren't out and about, they were home online more often. And again, we need to just dig into this a bit more, but I think it's important to note that there was an impact of COVID-19. So what do we learn from the substance use perspective? The good news is 80% of students 7th through 12th grade reported no use. So we were excited to see that number and then wanted to dig even further onto what did that mean and look at other areas of where was there moderate to heavy use. So although it's not a huge percentage, what we did learn is that these moderate and heavy users are not just drinking, they're what we call poly users. They're using multiple substances. So we wanted to look into that as well. If I go to the next slide, Mitch had mentioned the clusters. So one of the biggest predictors, and it showed conclusively in many ways that he looked at it, the biggest predictor of alcohol use was age. So as you can see, the gold bar here is no use. And in 7th grade, that's quite high. And as the student progresses along in age and in grade, use goes way up. So by the time they're 12th grade, 45% reportedly are heavy and moderate users. I should also note that that correlates with the parents' disapproval of it also going down. So their use goes up as the disapproval of parents goes down. So some of these observations, again, in the why, as we're trying to answer that question, grade is just the biggest predictor of that. We did think it was interesting, and it doesn't necessarily go along national norms, that they didn't report that sadness, anxiety, and loneliness predicted use. And that parent disapproval declines rapidly, as I mentioned, and that is one of the most biggest impact that we would note that would be able to predict less use. So quickly, just to dig into what do we mean by moderate and heavy drinkers. So again, it's 30% of the 11th grade and 45% of the 12th grade is reporting that they are moderate or heavy drinkers. And what are they doing? They are playing competitive drinking games, they're experiencing hangovers, they're trying to purchase alcohol out at stores outside of town. So these people are really wanting to use. And we want to just look more at the frequency of the use, the quantities that they're using. And again, we mentioned that they're polyusers. So although alcohol is the biggest substance they use, they're also using other things. So on the flip side, what are the factors that we have found are associated with students who choose not to use? There are hundreds of variables, as Mitch mentioned, and we just wanted to highlight them in individual protective factors as well as family protective factors. And we thought it was interesting that a lot reported, I just don't want to. And then they also said their parents are strict, which sort of lined up with the family variables. If you are a parent who has very clear rules about alcohol use and you strongly disapprove of substance use, you would tend to be a substance-free student as well. So parents have, again, a big impact here. So again, the key takeaways are listed here. I want to wrap up this portion to give you just, again, a snapshot. We could go into this in a lot more detail, but in the interest of time, we wanted to just lay out the groundwork of what we found so that we can come together as a community to start to decide what we might do about it. And we want to work on giving parents tools to help them support their children. That's our big takeaway. So now I'm going to turn it over to Emily Larkin, our program director at Thriving Youth, to talk about what we found in the mental health area.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelley. Good evening, everyone. So again, we're keeping this very brief tonight, but what did we learn about student mental health? Before we dive in, I think two quick things are important to keep in mind. Firstly, that we are not asking students in this survey diagnostic questions. We are reporting student responses to questions about how they're feeling. Are they feeling sad, depressed, anxious, or lonely? So these are the kind of questions students were asked. And second, this is the first time we've asked Darien students specific questions about mental health. So we unfortunately don't have past survey data to look to as a point of comparison. So those are just a few things to keep in mind. Now, you'll remember from Shelley's substance use cluster slide, 80% of that pie chart was blue, representing students not using substances, which is excellent. The mental health clusters, you can see, tell a different story. While we do have 31% of students in the blue thriving, we also have 46% of students in the anxious, distressed, and vulnerable categories, which is very concerning. Now, for students who are reporting good mental health, what do they have in common? We found that the number one predictor of good student mental health is students feeling valued. And this is challenging to define very precisely. It probably would mean something a little bit different to each person listening, but it's something we need to and want to explore. It's also worth noting that there are a lot of ways families are having a very positive impact on students' mental health. Another new series of questions this year was around students' sources of stress and pressure. And you can see here which areas students endorsed as high sources of stress and pressure and which were minimal. What's most important to note here is that students began reporting stress and pressure in these areas in 7th grade. So stress around getting good grades, getting into a good college, stressors that we might expect to emerge later in high school. So that was a significant takeaway. Another important discovery is that while grade was the greatest predictor for substance use, gender was the greatest predictor for student mental health. An important imbalance to point out is there are far more girls in the distressed category and far more boys in the thriving category when you think back to the clusters. The kind of stress students report experiencing is also different. We found girls reporting more stress, social stress due to peer relationships and social media, and boys reporting more academic stress. Now, tonight has been a very, very brief overview of the findings. There's lots more that we can unpack in our October presentation, but you've probably noticed that in terms of substance use, the drivers are fairly clear, and it's clear what parents can do to be part of the solution. Our mental health findings are much more nuanced, and we see tonight and the presentations to come this fall as just the start of a conversation. We know that students feeling valued and control of their lives is essential for youth mental health, but now we need to understand what that means to kids and how we can have a positive effect on that. So thank you so much for your time and attention tonight. We're very grateful. And for those of you who are not Board of Ed members and haven't gotten to see this presentation in advance, we'd love for you to join us on October 20th. We'll be sharing much more in-depth results and we'll have a panel with Q&A. So please join us for that. And we'd like to open it up for questions from the board.
Well, thank you very much for the work that goes on behind this and for the presentation. Much appreciated. And we'll open it up to board questions and comments. Mr. Sini.
Thank you again for the presentation. I think you mentioned that this is the first time that you've looked at certain aspects around the mental health of the students, and you ran the testing or the survey during a time that was not normal for any of us, especially our students. So might you comment a bit on a couple different factors? That Appendix A is really enlightening, and you look at COVID, and how that would create stress or COVID-related issues, and how that might have compounded some of the other anxieties, the stresses, throughout the number of categories that you listed in Appendix A.
Want me to take a crack at that, or who?
Sure, Mitch, go ahead.
That sounds great.
So yes, you're absolutely right. There's very little doubt that with COVID, substance use goes down. Kids are not seeing each other in person. They're not going to house parties, and that's a COVID effect. It's also true that in the mental health and the stress effect, that there are more than likely COVID effects there. There are national norms for the increase in COVID because they have given these surveys before and have no way to show that those apply to Darien. But you can basically take all those bad numbers down by about 10%, total 10%, and due to COVID. But what I would say is the sources of the stress are a lot about achievement. They're about standardized test scores, grades, getting into a good college, meeting parents' expectations. And those were around well before COVID and probably haven't been that much exacerbated by COVID. But certainly things like sadness and loneliness, I would think that those would be substantially impacted by COVID.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mrs. Ackman.
So I think this question is for Mitch, but it goes to kind of overall and as a board, what we do with this. One of the observation, you said, surprisingly, sadness, anxiety, and loneliness did not predict substance abuse. And this is counter to national norms. Because we're asking kids to self-report, I assume we believe they can even identify whether they are anxious or lonely or depressed, and then if that interrelates to their substance use. And I think that's a big leap. So as a Board of Education, what are we supposed to do with this material? Is it all self-reporting? Are there takeaways? Because some of these findings seem to be, true kid answers, but I don't know if they're really predicting anxiety, depression. Am I asking a clear question or not?
Let me.
If I'm being clear, I'm struggling because the facts seem so startling, and I don't know what we do as a group, although I understand we can look at this as this is how kids are currently feeling.
I'm not sure I understand the question, so let me give it a try, and then you
Sure.
tell me if that
Yeah.
works. If you think of it like this, the levels of stress and distress are pretty flat from 7th to 12th grades, and they rise precipitously around 9th and 10th grades for the substance use. So over the entire population, those two things aren't going to be correlated. But what I hope we don't want to leave you the impression is that there aren't pockets of kids for which substance abuse and depression are related. That was the whole point of doing these clusters. And if we kind of dug down more into that, I think we would find it. I think that was one of your questions. But there was also one about what do we as a community do about it?
Well, I think specifically, what do we as a board do about it, right? I mean, the Thriving Youth Task Force has done a great job, I think, in terms of presenting this to the public. But as a Board of Education, we're giving this in our schools. What do we glean from this? We're hearing it here. What do we do with this?
So there are a great number of very specific findings that we're not going to go over tonight. Tonight was a broad pastiche of the findings. And those findings at a more granular level are very actionable, whether they, and I live in Greenwich, I don't live in Darien. What you all do about that, you have to figure out. But they are they can get very specific. And that requires a kind of a further understanding of the data. But I think I don't think the mental health or the feelings of sadness, loneliness, and isolation, anxiety are not diagnostic. They're not, I am depressed, right? Because that's a diagnostic category. I've been feeling sad. I've been feeling lonely. I've been feeling anxious. And it's unlikely that any one group can solve that problem at the town level. I think there are a lot of things you can do, but that does take a coordinated town-wide response. And yeah,
That's very helpful. I think that's the important part, that these aren't diagnostic, but this is what our kids are reporting they're feeling. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
And Tara, just from a broader perspective, the Thriving Youth is hoping to convene all of the, amazing people that participate on our board to help address it through programming. And we're working closely with Dr. Adley and Scott McCarthy with the climate at the schools. And we'd be happy to work with the board as well if there was a good way to do that. So just wanted to put that out there too.
Great. Thank you, Shelley.
So Shelley, I would ask, how do we get this information, or do you get this information out to the broader community? We've got a core audience that always listens. That audience continues to grow, which is good, but how do we get it out there? And then I would go back to the administration and say, does this fit into the strategic plan under social and emotional learning and the wellness of our students? So Shelley, just how do you get this information out there? Because it's good information.
Sure. Great question. So we have a big, more thorough presentation on October 20th, which is showing up at the middle school. There will also be, in addition to all of our sort of, here's what we found, a panel of experts, including, we're still finalizing who they are, but licensed clinicians, things like that, so that parents can take, okay, here's what's been reported, what the students are reporting. Now, what can we do as parents, as teachers, as administrators, as a community to help our students, specifically around mental health? I mean, even from the beginning of this meeting, this is something that we all as a town need to come together on, and we would love to help facilitate that with data. So I don't know if that answers your question. We're going to do a big push to get as many people there as possible. We're also providing online Zoom. For whatever reason, the auditorium isn't big enough at Middlesex.
Great, thank you.
A quick question.
Sure, Mr. Brown.
So thank you. I like hearing a survey with 90,000 data points. That's wonderful. And I just had a question, and maybe the brevity of the presentation, but on the student mental health slide where we had the 5 different buckets, is that just a condensed presentation? Because I just look at the dispersion of the different categories, and it seems it's maybe 60-20 or 60-40 positive to negative. And I don't know if that's somewhere else in the data or that's just a function of trying to get this out here quickly. Yeah.
Say that again. Yeah, there's 60% little that are doing okay. Right?
Well, no, but if you look at the criteria, the 5 of them, I would argue that anxious, distressed, and vulnerable, so 3 out of the 5, those are not positive categories. It's not what we want to see.
That's
Thriving right. Is one we want to see, which would be 20. So it's 20-60. Or if you want to include okay, then we're 40-60. Just seems like it's a little skewed. So again, it may be elsewhere in the data. I was just questioning the presentation here, and it may just be because it's high level.
Well, I think they're saying that, roughly half of the kids are feeling some kind of distress, and roughly half of the kids are feeling okay. Good.
But if I have 5 choices and 60% of those are negative, then I'm going to skew more negative, correct?
No. Oh, sorry. Okay, good. Okay, now I understand your question. So, no, these are not questions on the survey. These are buckets that were formed from several questions on the survey. Okay. This is the result of that clustering technique.
Okay, so this is the result. It's not.
Yes,
It wasn't limited to 5 choices in the questionnaire.
That's correct.
That's what was
Mitch,
confusing me. Thank you for the clarity.
Mitch, just to clarify, do you off the top of your head have an example of what one of the questions would have been and how they can say, it's extreme one way or the other?
Yes. In the past 30 days, I've been feeling lonely, for instance, and then they could say never, rarely, sometimes, and often.
Got it. So four selections.
4 selections. And there are 6. Yeah, and 6 questions in the mental health section.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Brown. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so I have a question on the mental health as well. So, and we're talking about 46% or whether it's 69 that with the okay group that are feeling some levels of sadness or anxiety. We're saying that's the global, but in your writing, you're saying that females are much more prevalent than this. So if 69% of the global population is feeling anxious, what is the level of female mental health issues?
I don't. We do have that information. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but we did analyze it. And if you look at those 5 categories, the boys and the girls are almost reverse images of each other. So if you have, say, 31% thriving, let's say it's 40% for boys, might be 20% for girls. It's a dramatic difference. I don't have the actual numbers right off my hand. We can get that easily for you, but it's a big difference.
I can chime in with those numbers if that would be helpful. I just pulled it up and we've got 76 girls in the okay, anxious, distressed, and vulnerable. Just to chime in with that, yeah.
76%.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big number.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney.
So
Sorry,
I guess
go ahead.
to follow up on kind of to build on Mrs. Achman's question is, I'll ask this to the administration is, what is our plan to deal with 76% of our female population and total population that are experiencing distress or feeling vulnerable?
So probably, I don't know how far back it goes, Emily and some of the other staff members from the Thriving Youth and I met. My first question was, because I've lived this experience, we come in, and I know we've done it in our own district here for some time, so I wanted to learn as to what did we do in the past. But I've experienced where these tools are administered, and then we're left to deal with the fallout at the school level in terms of trying to make sense of it. I want to thank them because they spent a lot of time with us on the questions, on letting us review the questions, our school psychologists and clinicians reviewing the questions to make sure that when we get results back, we kind of understand, and we don't have to do a lot of interpretation around the questions, and they're not ambiguous, both for the people who are taking them and for those who are evaluating them. We had agreed that as Thriving Youth, I can't say all what they're doing in terms of the outreach of the community, but that's one of their charges to do that. I believe that's what they will be doing. We will be looking at with our school climate committees and our clinicians as to the additional data that's behind this. That's what I won't say agreed to, but that's what made most sense to me administratively. We can't just give it and then like the school's a big part of this and then just walk away from it, right? And they're not doing that, so I'm not suggesting that, but I use that language just to describe the situation that you're sort of discussing at the moment. So it's our intent. The principals have seen the data, so they've had the opportunity to review it as well, and we will be going to our school climate committees and our clinicians for them to dissect the other levels of information behind there that's most meaningful to them and that they want to address through their own action plan.
Mr. Sini.
I believe the next meeting, we're going to see the school psychologist's presentation or an upcoming meeting.
Yes, so I'll look at the schedule, but yes, it's on one of the
next couple meetings. Could you have them kind of reconcile maybe what we're hearing tonight to what they're seeing in the schools? And again, not directly reconciling to this study, but we're definitely hearing a direction here. And I just want to make sure that we're addressing some of the things that are raised.
Yeah, we can certainly, they can certainly speak to where they are in the process with it. I mean, so we can do that.
When you say clinicians, who are you referring to?
Social worker, school psychologists.
Okay, thank you.
Do a quick follow-up to Mr. Sini's question. If we're going to request, if possible, I'd be curious in light of some of the recent events in Mr. Sini's request, if there's any information on the effect or how we're measuring social emotional learning and continuance of certain things, how we're measuring how effective that is, since we've been doing it for a few years. Would love to hear that as part of their presentation if it's germane.
So what I think was agreed by the board, I just don't want this to develop into like methodology, and then we have to sort of dissect it differently, was the psychologist to come back and say actually what Mr. Brown is sort of saying in the area of social emotional learning, what are they seeing and how they're responding in their time and so on and so forth. That was, I think, what the charge was. So that's what we're trying to do. And we can maybe blend a little bit of this in.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Mrs. Parent.
To build off of both of that, when the psychologists come report to us, I would love to have a little more historical, anecdotal knowledge, maybe not metrics, I don't know if they have it, but are we seeing, because of COVID, are we seeing a big growth in these? Are these numbers so high because of COVID, or were these numbers high prior? Just anecdotally from the high school, because
It'll probably be anecdotally because it'd be unfair for them to tie to this just yet without dissecting it.
Mr. Brown, I'm sorry I cut you off. Did you have something else?
I'm good, Duke. Thank you so much.
All right, Mr. Brown. Mr.
Sorry,
Maroney.
one more thing that, and I appreciate your slide on the, let's celebrate the fact that there's 80% of students who are not using alcohol and drugs. I think the question, the part that I also looked at in that slide was that I see a trend that it's going down from even 2014, not just 2018 to 2021.
Yes.
And if memory serves as well, the Board of Education or the superintendent at that time changed the commitment policy from being a punishment to more of an educational process, which I think, and his words were, schools are not meant to discipline, schools are meant to educate. And to me, that was a big step. And I'm wondering if there's any data to support that the school has had an influence on the drop of substance abuse, or even educating the parents, because the parents are required to go to some of those meetings as well. As that, can we decipher anything of that?
I'm not sure you could draw a correlation, but certainly you certainly look at the data and see for time frame how those matched up. But I don't think you could correlate, but you could certainly look and.
although interestingly, if this survey, many of these kids in the survey have never had that experience because it didn't happen last year. The middle school kids wouldn't have it. And it has only happened limitedly this year. So
right.
If we find a correlation, we'd certainly have to make that program more robust to make it helpful. No, I'm actually agreeing. I'm agreeing with you. Like if it's helpful, then we should make it robust because it seems to have very impactful, maybe the first year.
And my honest point of asking this question is that if it does work, to me, this is the answer to the diversity education, the DEI discussion that was had earlier. And it's about education, and it's education of parents, community, and everything. And hopefully we can see a similar drop.
Yes, right. Thank you. Mrs. McCammon.
I just had a question about the social media line item that you had, the particular concern for girls. Can you talk a little bit about what the survey actually asked and what actually we can take away from that line?
I could speak to that, but I think Mitch, you might do a better job.
I can speak. I don't have the full report in front of me, but for younger girls, social media was associated with feeling more anxious and depressed. Now, there was a small set of girls, and I don't remember the numbers, but maybe fewer than 100, where they did get some self-esteem, it looked like, from social media use and likes. But for the majority of them, it wasn't so great. Is that helpful? Or is mostly yeah.
Is that something you all are planning to monitor going forward? And it's not exactly aligned with substance use, but certainly it might be with mental health.
Monitor it going forward, you mean?
Sorry, would you continue to survey it? Is this a permanent part of the survey?
Oh, I would think so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCann. Any other questions or comments around the survey? Again, thank you for your time. Appreciate all the hard work and the presentation this evening, and look forward to hearing at the presentation in October.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. We'll move on to discussion and possible acceptance of contemplated gifts from the Blue Wave Booster Club. Dr. Adley and Mr. Manfredonia.
Well, Mr. Manfredoni is right, front and center. Hello, Christopher.
Good evening, everyone. So you have in front of you tonight 2 contemplated gifts to consider for some of our winter and spring athletic teams. The first is some Speedo parkas for our boys swim team. These are similar to what the girls have currently. They're deck jackets for the team to wear in between events, in between meets, to stay warm while competing. And the second gift you have in front of you is for our girls lacrosse team to have a set of rain pants to be worn during inclement weather. These will be matching to what the girls got last year in terms of rain jackets. Both of these gifts will stay with the respective programs in the school and will be reissued on a year-to-year basis. Be happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Thank you, Mr. Manfredonia. Questions or comments around these gifts? Just to thank you to the Blue Wave Booster Club again for the generosity, and all those parents that support those clubs. May I have a motion to accept the gift from the Blue Wave Booster Club pursuant to the memorandums dated September 23rd, 2021 for the Speedo Parkers for the swim dive team and the rain pants for the girls lacrosse program. Mrs. Ritchie, second by Mrs. Achman. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manfredoni.
Thank you.
We'll move along to discussion on the August 2021-2022 financial report and possible action on proposed budget transfers. Mr. Rudolph.
So this is the first financial report of the new fiscal year. We are forecasting a year-end positive balance of $167,740. This does exclude any flood-related expenditures under the assumption that will be reimbursed by insurance. There was a request of Finance Committee to provide that detail, and we'll have that detail for both Storm Elsa and Ida at the next Finance Committee. The general education RCs are forecasting a positive $170,332. The special education RC is essentially flat at $208, and RC 28 COVID does have a $2,800 forecast for out-of-district transportation cleaning. We did include a breakdown of so far the COVID expenditures and the first ARP grant. We have that $2,800 transportation cost, and then the breakdown of the grant for the $1,025,000. Overall salaries are forecasted at a positive $59,000. The previous middle school principal transition to the new principal is a pending transfer before the board at a negative $51,000. We do have some salary savings associated at about $26,000, YMCA overtime at $34,000, and then budget control portion 0.6 has not been used at a positive $43,000. Operating expenditures are forecasted at a positive $91,000. Legal fees are trending positive, similar to the tail end of last year. The Correct partnership fee, Correct did receive a grant from the state of Connecticut, which reduced the membership cost to partnering districts, and so that is a positive $11,500. And then DSS has $66,000 of savings and operating costs. Fixed is a positive $73,000. Utilities are forecasted quite a bit better so far at $32,000. We had some favorable renewals with KERMA for our property insurance, workers' comp insurance, and general liability insurance, and then favorable renewal in student accident insurance. Revenue is forecasted at a slight decline of $56,000. The primary driver is summer school, which is a related transfer before the board this evening. So there are 3 transfers for consideration and approval. The first is for $51,425. This is to cover the cost of 3 months of the previous middle school principal as they transition to the new principal. We are recommending taking savings from some of those KERMA renewals and the student accident insurance renewals, as well as some savings in unaffiliated salaries that came in under budget. The second transfer is essentially an accounting adjustment, but it does cross broad categories. Revenue for Darien Summer School is $40,000 less than budgeted, but there were corresponding expense savings in consultant services for that $40,000. So we're essentially looking to collapse those two accounts. And then the third transfer is for $23,285. The budget did include the purchase of a third Suburban. There is a car shortage nationwide. We did order the Suburban the second budget opened. We're not expected to get that Suburban at this point until early November. So this transfer is to cover the cost of contracting out those services at least through November. If that car is delayed or delay in hiring a driver for that third Suburban, we will bring another transfer forward to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel. I will just also add that the Board of Finance approved the appropriation transfer request for Mr. Lynch to order the 3 vehicles that were damaged in the flood. So thank you to the Board of Finance for moving that along out of their Board of Finance account. I will open it up to board questions or comments. Mrs. McCammon.
Sounds like it's just a technical issue, but I understand that the DSS revenue was up, or excuse me, I understood that DSS enrollment was significantly up. So I'm curious why we would have a.
Sure. So we, when we build the budget, we look at all potential classes that could run. So in some instances, they have to have a certain amount of students to run that enrollment in order to run the class. If that class didn't run, there's also a corresponding expense savings, which is what we're seeing here. Revenue as a whole was about the highest in about 5 or 6 years. So we did have a high revenue collection period because of that high enrollment, but it's just a factor of which classes ran and which didn't.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Mr. Cini.
I just wanted to reiterate something I said at the Finance Committee meeting. It's good to be in a somewhat normal, quote unquote, budget year. Only 6 months ago, we were talking about including maybe up to 827,000 in COVID expenses. That number is only 2,800 right now, full year view. And last year, we were running well over a $1.1 million deficit, and we have a very small surplus. So it's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cini. Any other questions around the Finance Committee's, Mr. Rudel's report? May I have a motion to approve the budget? May I have a motion to approve the August budget transfers as presented in the memo by Mr. Rudel, Mrs. Achman, and seconded by Mrs. Stein. All those in favor? That is unanimous.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Moving along, discussion and possible action on the establishment of a curriculum committee. Dr. Adley and Mr. Tranberg have provided some information for discussion at the board level around a curriculum committee at a board level, and also presented some information on some future article that's coming out from CABE on the board's involvement in curriculum, and also a district curriculum committee. So I'd like to hear from Mr. Tranberg and Dr. Adley, their thoughts on the curriculum committee at the board level. I was part of that many years ago. We are operating as a curriculum at large committee at the board level, which is okay in terms of the statutes. But I think based on feedback from the community, we want to really look and have a discussion around a board curriculum committee, and also look at the district curriculum committee. So I will turn it over to both you gentlemen.
I'll turn it over to you in a second. I just sort of frame it a little bit. I hope the board finds this article informative and helpful. It's certainly an objective point of view, right? That sort of addresses many of the issues that we're looking at, including confusion from the community, clarification. I do think categorically about this, right? I do believe that curriculum is a board governance issue. There's no question about that. And certainly this district has been well served by the system that's been participating under, but I certainly have no qualms around the board getting involved in curriculum. This gives a wee bit of a sense of some of the issues that are on the table. It also gives a little bit of a sense of some of the requirements that are required, and how do you get there, and what vehicle is best to get there. So I heard Mr. Chairman say looking at potentially two committees there. It would be my recommendation. I think it would be Christopher's recommendation that if we're going to do any committees, that we have one of those committees. But having said that, I'll let Chris maybe talk to specifically what we might be looking at or recommending or otherwise.
Good evening, everyone. And first, I just have to say, as a person who identifies with the LGBTQIA+ community, I want to thank everyone for the comments tonight. I think about if I was a kid in high school, this discussion would never even be happening. Acknowledging that something like that happened just wouldn't have been part of the discussion. And so we've come far, not far enough. But I just do want to say I appreciate that. And for the kids out there, I know they're not watching Board of Ed meetings. But if one is, I'll say I see you, we see you, and we can do better for you. So I want to put that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Tranberg.
For the curriculum committee, what I had proposed last time, and I think Mr. Brown's question was, I haven't had a chance with you in my role just yet to have a non-COVID minute. I came during COVID, and so the traditional, what I would traditionally hope to be presenting to the board, there hasn't been an opportunity for it because we have not been making curriculum changes. We have not brought in new programs. So what I proposed this year was, can we use our time as a curriculum as a whole, or the committee as a whole, to do what I think and what I've heard you say you'd like to see. With that said, when you read the legislation, there might be a question about, okay, so what is our district curriculum committee? We have a district curriculum committee. It's not a board committee, but we have a curriculum leadership team that is made up of the department chairs that were hired to provide that direct oversight of curriculum, and they work directly with me. And they also work with two other committees, and one would be the Professional Development and Evaluation Committee, which we refer to as PDEC. And there's also a curriculum council at the high school. So that's kind of a triangulated group of how our district curriculum committee functions. So it's there. What's not there, as described in the CABE memo, which you have a fun preview of, hasn't been released yet, is that committee being a district committee where board members may sit on that committee. So that's a structure that we could change. I have no personal opposition to that changing. I said it last time, I'll say it again. Curriculum work is not secret. I want nothing but for curriculum to be transparent. So if that's what we feel like we need to do as a community, I'm glad to do that and support it. And I'll support whatever you'd like to do as a board. I will say there's not been a second of me thinking that this board is not involved in curriculum and involved in all aspects of the success of the school district. So if we're making changes collectively, I would hope that it's part of a bigger picture, not because of things that are happening right now. And I don't know how else to say that in a more articulate way. The third piece is a curriculum subcommittee. That would be a board committee, similar to the finance committee or the policy committee. And to be quite honest, if you'd like to do that, absolutely fine, but it's adding another layer of the same information. So we'd have a district curriculum committee, and we'd have a board subcommittee, and ultimately as the board, you're still going to need to hear and see and approve those things. So then the committee as the whole is going to see it. So if you are the lucky board member, say, that got to be on the district curriculum committee, I would assume you'd also be on the subcommittee, and on this committee, you truly would be going through that vetting process on a triple. And so I don't see the added benefit of that. That's my personal and professional recommendation there.
So if I may say, Mr. Chairman, if the board is looking at two of those, I would honestly ask us not do two of them. It just seems redundant, and given all the work that we are doing at the moment, right, to have two of those committees, it's just a heavy lift, and B, I just think it's redundant in that way. And if you're asking for a preference, we would say the preference would be the district committee, because there you're going to be in the presence of our instructional leaders, right? So that would be our recommendation. And if you're talking about a start date, I would have a recommendation about that too, but we can maybe talk about that as you discuss it, just discuss this particular issue of establishing a committee.
Great, thank you, Dr. Adley.
I will open it up to board conversation around this. Mrs. McCammon.
I'm first of all appreciative that we're having the conversation. Thank you, because it's come up a couple times. So I'm glad that we're talking about it. My interest in the conversation is that I think that we're at a point in time where we actually have a fair amount of curricular work we potentially need to do. We know we may not understand all of the scope of it in that we're responding to COVID, and we know there may be some curricular adjustments as a result, and they could be tricky. Plus, we always have some things coming from the state or other types of adjustments as we continue down a responsive curricular model. We haven't really tried on what a responsive curricular model looks like at the board table beyond, some of the presentations. I do believe that, again, drawing a point in time moving forward, that curriculum needs a focus. And what I like about our subcommittees is that it does enable a small group of people to really focus and spend time on developing. I do respect that done inappropriately, you don't want the same conversation to happen at a subcommittee level that happens at the board level. I've seen that happen before, and I think that is a waste of everyone's time. But I do really like the idea of there being a small group who are very strongly tasked with focusing on our curriculum. And focusing on, as the CABE memo talks about, the connections to policy. The CABE policy, the sample policies have a lot that are really focused on curriculum. Right now, we're deriving a lot of that content from our strategic plan, but policy is a way to memorialize some of those things. And we'd have someone at the board level who was prepared, or a group at the board level who were prepared to have those conversations and to take them into policy. And so anyway, I think this is a worthwhile conversation about having people focused on it, defining a scope. I don't know that we have to exactly understand the charge today. It is something we could look at and develop. But I do strongly feel that we would have to commit that it really is a subcommittee that does work, and that it isn't a committee that does the same work that then the board does 2 days later.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Mrs. Stein.
Having sat on the old curriculum committee and being on the board when two superintendents sort of felt that it wasn't an appropriate committee, it was really, to Jill's point, because of redundancy, that what we were doing at the curriculum committee was just being regurgitated at the board table. In policy and finance, we drill down, we have those deep conversations, and it's a much more abbreviated conversation. So I fully support that concept if there is a curriculum committee. I have 2 meetings left, so my position on it isn't as important as the other board members. What I would say is I did look on other district websites today just to see, and about half the towns in Fairfield County have them, half don't. On one in particular, and I think it happened to be Ridgefield, they say that they have a set number of meetings a year. So whether we decide, I'm still on the board, to do it as a whole or a subcommittee, I think having a minimum number of curriculum updates will appease a lot of people and also give us sort of a framework. So I like that idea versus saying we're going to have some committee or we're going to all be part of it, but maybe it's 4 times a year, maybe it's 5 times a year, whatever it is, come up and think about time of year and when those updates would make sense. And, in terms of, I defer sort of to the board members that are staying on what you guys want to have. I am fine with a curriculum committee. I have said at our last retreat, I think a few of us actually raised the idea that we really haven't addressed curriculum. We had that conversation, Chris, because of COVID, and we need to have the conversations. I know there is a survey circulating around saying some of us didn't support it or did. I'm putting it out there. I'm fully supportive of discussing curriculum. It's our job. How we do it is for this board to decide.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. Mr. Sini.
First, thank you for giving us this preview of the CABE memo. I think it was well written and a huge resource, and probably fed into the memo that you both drafted to the board as well. If I could take a minute and just read like one of the key aspects of this memo that I'm taking away and would be in support of a subcommittee. And again, a true subcommittee. And I think this board has proven that we can operate subcommittees and not replicate the work. Perfect example is just the finance report, which took a fraction of the time of our finance committee meeting. But why I think it's so important is this memo goes on to say curriculum encompasses everything presented to and provided for students under the jurisdiction of the school board and the superintendent of schools. It is so important that it will inevitably cause controversy. A major reason some boards may shy away from this critical area of responsibility. Boards need to be prepared and respond appropriately to curricular controversy when it arises. I'm going to speak for myself, but I've noticed a bit of controversy around the curriculum most recently. We have subcommittees that operate effectively. I think it actually might drive productivity of this board. I'm sorry, it might create a couple extra meetings or a few extra meetings for administration, but I think guided properly, and I think we have some great guidance already through your memos and the CAVE memos, we can have a really effective subcommittee, and I think will serve the board well and the community well.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mrs. Othman.
So forgive me, I have a few comments on this. First, thank you to Mr. Tramberg for your comments about the board being involved in curriculum. I take issue with the idea of the opening comments of the board getting involved in curriculum. It is one of the three main things that boards of education do, approve curriculum. Pre-COVID, so Mr. Tramberg, you haven't had your moment in the spotlight yet. Dr. De Silva brought us curriculum every year, and we reviewed it as a board of the whole. We can create a curriculum committee, and it could be any iteration of what we've talked here, and that is fine. But I think first we need to establish we have been approving curriculum. We have been doing it as a committee of the whole, and we can choose to have a subcommittee, just like we do with finance or policy or anything else. I think I did not get the email. I don't know if I was inadvertently left off about a petition circulating. However, someone did send me the petition to sign. I don't know if anyone on the board got questions about it before it was written, but again, I think facts matter. This Board of Education did not vote down a curriculum committee in September of 2020. We voted down an amendment to the agenda to discuss the issue that night. Don't know if anyone remembers, September 2020, we were trying to open up schools. A communications committee was discussed, a curriculum committee was not discussed. So I just think before we go out and rile up the public, we have to set the stage with the actual facts. The facts are the board can decide for a curriculum committee. I do think we should, I think probably some board members are used to the way we've been vetting curriculum, some are not. There may be other ideas too, but there's gonna take some training and guidance to understand what that means and how to do it. So I think the administration has to come forward with a plan of how to get people prepared for that. 2020 was not a year where we changed curriculum. So the curriculum that we have had some controversy over has been in district. So I think that if we decide to do a curriculum committee, that is a fine adventure and decision to go on. We need to understand what the work is, how it's changing from the work we do, and then what people on those committee are expected to do, because I assume the chair will assign members. But we have met all of our statutory requirements. We are not getting involved in curriculum. This board has been involved in curriculum. Mr. Tramberg may not have presented it, but because we weren't changing curriculum in 2020. And I really do look forward to the curriculum that you bring forward to us. I think Mrs. Stein is correct. It would be nice to have regular updates. And I think that if anyone knows Dr. De Silva, they recognize those updates were thorough and fair, and the board vetted a lot. So if tonight we decide to move that down to a subcommittee, or we decide to push that decision, whatever it is, that's fine work to do, but let's not negate a lot of the great work that has been done. And if there's a need to be responsive, let's be responsive. Let's do the work.
Thank you, Mrs. Othman. Mrs. Parent.
I agree with a lot of what Mrs. Othman said, and I agree with a lot of what everybody has said tonight. Curriculum is one of our major jobs in this role, is to make sure that the curriculum that we have in our schools is appropriate and meets statute and is what we want our children to be learning. I think we have to be careful about the charge of a subcommittee, if that's what we end up with. We have to be careful that we are operating at a higher level. It is not the role of a subcommittee to vet every single piece of paper, every single video clip that is presented to a student. That is not the Board of Education's role. I think there's some misunderstanding of what the role of the board's role in curriculum is. I have heard both Mr. Schaberg and Dr. Adley suggest that the best use of their time and the best use of our time would be what was presented in the CABE memo, the district curriculum committee. And I'm wondering out loud, if having a board member or two, I think more than one is probably appropriate on that committee, would that fulfill the same purpose of a subcommittee? To take that further, is it better to have board members on that district curriculum committee where they're actually talking about curriculum at the table with the instructional experts to ensure that the board members we are elected to represent everybody, to represent the entire electorate of Darien? Is it better to have us sitting on that committee than on a subcommittee where we're getting reports and not necessarily engaging in the work?
Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Mrs. McCammon.
The other thing I neglected to mention earlier when I was talking is that I think there's also maybe an opportunity for the curriculum subcommittee to also talk about special education. We used to have special education separately, and I know special education isn't necessarily curriculum, but there are potentially could be touch points. I do want to pick up on what Mrs. Parent was saying and what administration were saying about having a board member or board members serve on the committee, the district committee. I do think that serves a slightly different function in that I think that that's not as transparent. Yes, the person would be representing the board, but that wouldn't be, the public wouldn't be able to see that and their fellow board members would not be able to see it. So I'm not against it, but I think it serves a slightly different purpose than what a subcommittee would be intending to solve. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Mrs. Ackman.
So I'll be quick, Dennis, but I agree with Mrs. McCammon. Those are different roles. So a board is approving curriculum, and if it's going to function as Mr. Sini drew the correlation to the finance committee, we don't sit with Mr. Rudel and draw up the finances. He comes and he presents it. In the old curriculum model, and this is prior to my time on the board, it ended when Michael Harmon was chair. There were no district chairs, but the assistant superintendent would come and sit with the board members and present what was going on, and they would run through curriculum, but they weren't designing and sitting on the district committee for it. So possibly the model could be that the district chairs or department chairs, come and present to the board members on the committee curriculum changes, and they vet it much like we do the financials. They ask the board questions, the public can view it, the public can ask questions. So if we're going to run it in a model like we do policy or finance, I would agree with Mrs. McCammon that that's a very different role than sitting at the district level, because in some ways that's only going to be one or 2 points of view, and you are going to repeat the same process at a board meeting. So I would agree that if you're going to model it like a subcommittee of the board, then you do it like a true subcommittee of the board, and you have Mr. Rudel comes and presents to the finance committee, Mrs. Sion does to the policy committee. Whoever is the appropriate person comes and presents to the curriculum committee.
And that's the way it would work. That is the way it would work, Ms. Exactly.
Mr. Maroney.
That was actually exactly my point. I think you need to have.
Repeat it?
I'm just going to say, to me, the big part is having it. I think the advent of the video has changed the game. I think pre-video was everybody had to go to the meeting to understand the work. And now that we have video, you can do something else, watch the video at your leisure and be able to have the answers. And as Mr. Sini said, I think the subcommittees have run much better thanks to the Channel 79 and Jeff and everyone here who tapes these things. So thank you for that. I think.
Side note, Mrs. Ritchie made us tape all committee meetings before she was on the Board of Ed.
But that has been a big bonus, and I think that will help us do the work of a curriculum committee to allow us to go deeper and understand, because otherwise we'll be here till midnight every night. And I will say, Katie, I think your point of a structured meeting is brilliant. Having it be like put it on our master agenda and have curriculum updates regularly and it's specified. I think it's a very good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mr. Brown, I want to make sure I don't overlook you in the bright lights of Chicago.
No problem. Thank you very much, Duke. I just would like to second Mr. Sini's comments that I think we should have a subcommittee of the board to do this work. And one of the things, I'm just looking through the minutes of a prior meeting, and we did have this on action for, hang on, let me read it. We did have this on action for regarding the formation of a curriculum committee. So I'm glad we're finally getting around to doing this again as a board, and I would welcome having this as a subcommittee of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Ackman?
Just a quick question. So I think finances, many of us have experiences and can read. Policy, many of us have experience with and can read. Is there any, does everyone feel comfortable if Mr. Deneen was to assign them to the curriculum committee, that they would know their work and know what they're looking, or is there some training
I
available?
feel comfortable.
Some of us have masters in education, but I think it's a fair question, right? If you get assigned to the curriculum committee, do you know what you're doing?
Right. I think to that point, there's almost one question that was on my mind is there's almost a learning process or a professional development process that maybe we could look at for that specific committee. So to that point, Mrs. Ritchie.
Just for Chris, thank you for all this information. And if there is a board curriculum committee, what does that do to the district committee that you have in place? Would you do the structure that's outlined here in the CAVE memo? If there is a board committee, does that then change? Would you need, I don't think you would need to have a board member on that committee because it seems a lot of redundancy there.
Can I rephrase? Are you asking if there was a Board of Ed subcommittee, does there need to be the district curriculum?
Well, there does need to be the district.
Because there already is.
Right.
But
we
would
don't,
not
I don't
need to
think
have
we
a
need
board
to have
member.
a board member on that committee then, because it seems to be a lot of repetitive.
No, yeah, and I would say not necessarily. I kind of think of it as, if it worked perfectly, it would be a funnel. So the district curriculum committee is kind of doing the largest look, and then a subcommittee would take a more fine-grained, and then the Board of Ed is ultimately approving the summary of what the subcommittee moved forward. From the relationship I have with you so far, I would feel like the full board would want to know what was happening in that curriculum subcommittee. And so my hesitation is about that. This is the most public setting that we have. And my thought is that, and I would welcome board members on the district committee, because if the interest is in learning about the process, that's where that happens. And that's where you have professionals across content areas, grade levels and disciplines that do that work and discuss it. And it would give you some insight into the thinking that goes into curriculum there. I feel that the subcommittee and this full board would be somewhat redundant, and that's okay. If that's my job, and I'll do my job and I'll do it well. That's just my thinking now. I can't articulate how I would see the subcommittee being different than what I would guess you would all like to see as a full board.
Mr. Sini, sorry, I didn't say that first.
I mean, again, I go back to the CAVE memo, and it's very specific how you would structure this. And it says one or two members of the board may be appointed as liaison members of the district curriculum committee. So there is a funnel aspect, and we don't want to duplicate work. I see maybe the chair of the subcommittee being the liaison, if you will. That person's going to be very busy and qualified. I'm looking at you, Sarah, so with a grin. And so I think again, this community has asked for a bit more focus on curriculum. Again, from all sides. And I think it would be a great tool to, and maybe we find it redundant and then we adopt better practices as we go forward. But we will, I think we can vet certain things in the subcommittee and bring a more streamlined presentation to the board.
Mrs. Stein.
I was just gonna say, there were times on the curriculum subcommittee when it was beneficial to have the subcommittee meetings. And so those were times when we were bringing in a new math program and we looked at physical manipulatives here that weren't at the full board table, right? We had opportunities to sort of go deeper. So I think it also is year to year, right? In terms of what we're doing curricularly. Are we having big initiatives? Are there new textbooks? Is there new science standards? Like for certain meetings, yes. I don't know, maybe you guys decide to try it for a year, and if it's redundant, then you've already established the fact that you have regular curriculum updates, and maybe you go back to the full board. But to me, what I'm hearing is the community really wants it, and it seems like several board members want it. We've done it before, and Chris, you have an opportunity to do it better, you know, and knowing what the concerns are.
Mrs. Ritchie, thank you, Mrs. Stein.
I'm just curious, Katie, since you have the history, why was this subcommittee disbanded?
When Dr. Brenner came in, he felt that we didn't need a curriculum subcommittee. He felt that the full board should be part of it. And so we would have, you know, Dr. De Silva came in and she did do very thorough curriculum updates. You know, I think those of us on the board at the time felt like we were doing a good job reviewing curriculum and that Dr. De Silva was really bringing robust curriculum to the full board. But, you know, the messages I'm hearing doesn't sound like that's the direction people want to go in.
Let me switch over to Mrs. Farren. Thank you, Mrs. Stein.
I'm just gonna throw out that there's the potential that after, in November, 4 of the chairs will be filled by different people on this board.
Yeah.
So I wonder if, for this upcoming year, do we go back to the more robust curriculum updates that we have not had in the past 18 months and think about more thoughtfully how this curriculum committee is structured, what the charge is, what the purpose is, so that we do it well and we do it, we're not floundering. I think that the timing of it, I'm just questioning the timing of it.
Thank you, Mrs. Farren. Mrs. Achman.
So to Mrs. Ritchie's question, because a curriculum committee has come up and being chair, it's come up at different times with different superintendents. And the feeling at that time was almost the reverse of what we're hearing now, was that it was only the people on the curriculum committee that really understood curriculum. And so when the board was asked to pass curriculum, a lot of members were like, this is my statutory obligation. And I don't know as much as someone else. Now, Mr. Maroney might be right. Now that committee meetings are taped and technology's evolved, that might be solvable. But it's funny to see the swing, right? That the board's now like, oh, we feel like it's been so dispersed that we really need a committee to drill down, which shows you there's no right or wrong way to do it. There's just different ways to do it. So there's nothing wrong with trying something different. Again, I'd say when we went to a more responsive curriculum, that makes it a little more different than a flat curriculum. And that's where I wonder if, at least for some period of time, or for the first curriculum updates, pre-committee, the whole board sees it. And then people know, is this really their bailiwick where they can get down and dirty when they want to get on that committee? Maybe in terms of Mrs. Parent's timing, we bring some curriculum in the next quarter so people really understand what it feels like, what it might be like, because a responsive curriculum is so different than other types of curriculum. I don't know how board members feel, but I think part of the concern before was the whole board wanted to be informed on curriculum and felt that they weren't. And so now if we feel like the whole board maybe needs a little education on curriculum and people dig deeper, I just want to make sure everyone knows what they're looking at and understands the curriculum we currently have. Is there a way to maybe just make sure that when you form that committee, the people involved know what they're doing?
Thank you, Mrs. Achman. Dr. Adley.
So thank you for your discussion. And again, I reiterate, I'm fully in support of governance and participation and oversight over curriculum completely. I would say though, if you're going to go from where we are to a new process, I would say, if you're going to do the curriculum committee, great, let's do that. But I would not recommend 2 of these things. That's just, it's very unusual actually to have 2. They may recommend it and they may, Cabe may say this and that, and it's very objective. So it is what it is. But in most districts, you'll find that there's either one of the other, that there's either a board committee, call a subcommittee if you want to call it that, that is curriculum. If you want to bring people to that, then we bring people to that. I would also suggest that with the election, I would honestly suggest that we transition this into potentially the new year is when we start it, because everybody's got planning to do. You can't just put something in. We have to accommodate that and make sure that we do it properly, both with the training, information, a nice transition into it. I think that would make sense. And honestly, I would support a board subcommittee.
Can I just
you,
add
Dr.
to that
Adley.
point
Mrs.
on
Stein.
timing? In previous years, we have had some issues, whether it was a curriculum subcommittee or not, having curriculum come during budget time, when it's a dollar number, not talking about the actual program. So I would just be mindful that you don't have big budget initiatives that are curricular, meaning textbooks, programs, whatever, and that's your introduction. Because to Tara's point, I don't think that's a great way to onboard the board into curriculum.
No, and actually, the process that we've been working under up until this year, because we corrected, was curriculum decisions were made after the budget, which made no sense. So now it at least is front loaded as to, anyway, yes.
Mrs. McCammon.
Alan, what did you mean when you say into the new year? Did you mean after November? Did you mean after January? Did you mean after July?
Well, I was just thinking that January seems like a reasonable transition point, get people on board. A wee bit of training in terms of what we're doing and how we do it with the committee and transition, because even just scheduling these just now, even with just even that alone, that's going to be a challenge to schedule, but the things that have to be changed, canceled, other committees that we're working on, I just think that it would be a reasonable transition period.
Okay, so thank you for clarifying. I think there's been a fair amount of discussion while we've been happy with, certainly we have been approving curriculum. There's been a fair amount of discussion about what the board wants to see in various kinds of curricular documents. And I think that's a discussion that can be very easily held by a subcommittee. So I do think that there's some work to be done on, I think there's an opportunity to really have a couple of people really focus on curriculum, how we talk about it, what we talk about, really streamlining the work as it was used before. And back to that point in the CABE memo, also creating a process for, as it notes, boards need to be prepared to respond appropriately to curricular controversy when it arises. I mentioned last week that this is the third controversy that we've talked about. We talked about the library display. We talked about the Israeli-Palestinian materials. Now we're talking about some materials lately. So it does seem like this is something that does persist over time, and it's an area that a subcommittee can focus on. So I do respect your point about just, making things happen. But I strongly feel that curriculum is an area that could use a couple people focused on it.
So go ahead, Mrs.
Sorry.
Lockman, and then I'm going to recap
Yes.
and move it along.
So while I agree with Mrs. McCammon, I actually think it's a subcommittee, not a district committee, if we're gonna pick one. Even your example is where I think that the board needs just some conversation of outlining what it is, because I would say that display in the library wasn't curriculum. Right, I would say it was a display. But Mrs. McCammon might rightfully argue, I feel like that's part of curriculum, and that's why curriculum is so nebulous. It's even nebulous in actually how the statute is written. So I think we need some common understanding if we're gonna do this subcommittee. And I would just really urge, again, I think you make a strong point of like, well, some people know what they want to see. Well, is there a board agreement on what they want to see? And I don't say that to hold it up. I say it to actually make it work. Because when it's the 9 of us, we can all kind of argue it out. When it's a small group, I think the communications committee came back, felt like they did a lot of work, and the board was like, whoa, what's this? And so some people might have felt like they spun their wheels and did a lot of work, and then it wasn't received. And other people might have felt like they went too far. So if we're going to do this, I think that we do it and then we make sure it's really tight and defined, or, horse and cart, decide which way you want to do it. I personally think if you're going to do it, you do a subcommittee, not a district level. And then I think we start the work, but everyone has to know what we're agreeing it is. It's not every piece of paper in the district is not curriculum.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mrs. Ritchie, and then Mr. Brown, I'll give you one more opportunity, and then we got to move it along.
So just to add a concern as the discussion has progressed, subcommittees don't make decisions, the board does. So I think also when you're forming this committee, we have to be very cautious about what the charge of this committee is and to ensure that the decisions are made at this board table and not at the subcommittee level. So
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Any last comments, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to follow up from the section that Mr. Sini read. The curriculum encompasses everything presented to and provided for students under the jurisdiction of the school board. So whether it was in the library or whether it was on the playing fields or whether it was in, in the cafeteria, that's on us. So I just would like to reiterate that point. Thank you.
Although the clause there is under the jurisdiction of the school board.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
I'd like to make a motion, sir.
Yes, can I recap some of the things that I think I heard to start, just to wrap it up quickly? So Mr. Tranberg, first, thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Adley, for all the information. I think it is important to go back to some of the earlier points that you said. We have been in a pandemic. There have been no real changes to curriculum. There was a lot of work that was being discussed before Susie De Silva left, and there's a lot of things in motion, but curriculum has not changed. I think that's been part of the challenge is we haven't had curriculum updates to the board, and we're going to have new board members coming on board. What I heard in some comments from Mrs. Stein and other members around the board, I'm almost thinking we need a curriculum master agenda so people understand where we are in the life cycle of curriculum, whether it's existing curriculum that may or may not come up for changes, or whether it's new curriculum that people are bringing. I think the other component to this is we've invested a lot in people in terms of these department chairs and curriculum people, Julie Droller and those roles that, we've got the right people in place. But I think what I'm hearing from a board perspective, we'd like to understand more how it's organized, how it's working, what's the flow, what's the process. Even I think sometimes an inventory of what's out there from a curriculum standpoint, and then how does that curriculum move or go through the process, even in terms of what you do over the summer with curriculum writing. So my recommendation would be that we get a motion from the board on the concept of having a curriculum committee. I think it's a challenging time right now as we go into people going off the board, new people coming on the board, but spend time over the next month or so getting information that will organize what that curriculum committee looks like, what its charge is, what its function is. While we have good people on the board over the next month or so, before anything changes, we can pull that information together. Mr. Sini.
I make the motion now.
Make a motion, Mr. Sini.
I'd like to make a motion that the Darien Board of Education establishes a curriculum subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Brown made a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous. All right. So thank you all. As always, good conversation. Again, I think we all agree we need a curriculum subcommittee. I think what we really agree on is there's a lot of work that has to be done to understand what that committee is going to do, how it's going to function, who the people are that are going to be on it. And then we'll continue the dialogue of the coordination, Mr. Tranberg, with what you do at the district level. And I think that's all important work. All right. Thank you very much for the conversation. We will move on to first reading and discussion of proposed revised Board of Education policies. Policy 1075 green cleaning protocols, policy 1200 use of school facilities, policy 1225 visitors policy, 1250 school volunteers, student interns, and other non-employees, policy 5220 student discipline, policy 5175 bullying prevention and intervention, proposed new board policy 9280 student representatives on the Board of Education, policy C 191 health and safety, policy 9310 meeting conduct. I will turn it over to Mrs. Stein and Ms. Sion.
In an effort not to be redundant, and because you all watched our riveting policy meeting 2 Fridays ago, I think the quickest way to go through this is we can just touch on each policy. I received 2 questions from Mr. Maroney, but they're on the student representative to the Board of Ed that we can address at that point, but I haven't received other board questions. So Marge, if you want to just quickly, We can go one by one, and if you have a specific question, let us know. Marge will just give a high-level update.
So I think this sign, you'll work through the cover memo, I
Yep.
think is a good way to
Yes,
go.
and just one by one.
Right, so the green cleaning protocols, it's the same provision that we added last year for COVID, but Shipman is recommending that we make it permanent. It just makes clear to the public that we are able to use any cleaning product that the federal law allows.
Any questions?
Policy 1200 use of school facilities adds back the provision that expired on June 30th, which requires people using our facilities to abide by any health and safety protocols.
And right, was one of those edits the Y there?
Yes.
Yeah, so the one edit we made at the subcommittee level is the Y was on a separated out from other town usage, so we put them on the same line so that they were same priority.
So I'll ask as you go through these, so we don't, since we're focused on one at a time, any board questions or comments on either of those two policies? All right, go ahead and sign.
So policies 1225 and 1250, both again reinstate the provision that expired on June 30th, which requires volunteers and visitors and non-employees to abide by health and safety protocols. Also, Shipman and Goodwin recommended that we add, because it is best practice, that certain volunteers, those who are alone with students or go on overnight field trips, submit to background checks every 5 years.
Questions or comments on that policy? Okay, go ahead.
So student discipline again adds back the provisions that expired on June 30th, which make it clear that any virtual school platform is part of the school. Then the student would be subject to discipline if they violated any of our standards of conduct. At Mrs. McCann's suggestion, and we did check with Shipman and Goodwin, it does provide that expulsion hearings can be had virtually. Parents do have the right to now request the policy. This is what we added, a virtual hearing, but it is still up to the superintendent to decide whether to grant that request based on the totality of the circumstances. There is a strong presumption to have expulsion hearings in person.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from the board? All right, thank you. Go continue.
Policy 5175, bullying prevention and intervention. The legislature made significant changes in the definition of bullying, in the composition of the School Safe Climate Committee, and certain other requirements of things that need to be posted on the website. These are all mandated by a change in law.
Questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Continue.
So student representatives on the Board of Education, we did add a provision that says that family members of sitting Board of Education members cannot be chosen for these positions. And also we made sure that if a student is subject to discipline in the same calendar year that they're ineligible, this lines up with the athletic policy.
Okay, questions or comments?
Dennis, do you want to ask your?
Mr. Maroney.
So I had two questions. One is on number 6, student representatives will be seated at the Board of Education meeting, at the board table at each Board of Education meeting. Should that be a should, or what if we have a virtual meeting? Do they need to sit there? And my second question was,
About
the student representatives will provide updates to the board at the start of each meeting. Should that be a should as well, in case if we have a meeting January 3rd, we come back from vacation, and maybe there's nothing to present, do they have to present something because it says will?
So I think it was worded that way in the model policies that we looked at, because they wanted to make sure that the student representatives had a role that's front and center, but we could look at changing that. So I understand what you're saying, and if the board wants, we can look at changing that language.
So we could change will to may. So it's not with that.
I don't know if it's a big deal to anyone else, but for me, it just kind of jumped out to me. So.
I guess the only, the only intention of that would be that the same way as a board member here will sit at the table, but you could be sitting remotely if because it's allowed now, right? If it's necessary to do that. So I don't think it would preclude it, but if there's a better way of saying it, certainly we can consider that.
Yes,
I
Mrs.
think
Hoffman.
the intention of the will is so that at some point the student can't be mitigated to the audience by the board. So, if, let's say, future boards are like, well, you have to sit in the audience, you're not one of us, that by policy, they must be there. So I think
I think we just need to think about that if we do the May. I mean, I hear your point. I think it's more to make sure the student has standing than to force, even if their report is, I have no report, that meets the requirement of a report, but it might protect any board from mitigating the student or relegating the student during a meeting, not mitigate.
Mrs.
sorry.
McCammon.
Thank you for adding the family line in. I think that makes a lot of sense. The way it's written, you could have, however, 2 student representatives, both of whom are related. I'm probably okay with that as a person, but I wanted to mention it if you had a senior and a junior, just to make sure the board's okay.
I actually didn't hear that.
I will have a senior and a junior at the same time. Technically, if I'm not sitting here, both of them could serve on the board. I'm just confirming that we're okay with that. I think it's fine, but I just wanted to say it out loud.
But you could have siblings.
Siblings, that's
Yeah.
the word.
Yes, it's possible, yes.
Everyone all right with that? Okay. Anything else around the student representatives on the board? All right, good.
So policy C19-1, health and safety protocols, this reinstitutes the policy that the board enacted last year and expired at June 30th. It's the same wording as the policy from last year.
Questions or comments on that? Good. Last one.
And finally, meeting conduct allows the board the maximum flexibility under the current executive order, which will expire in April of 2022, to hold board meetings remotely. And it does include an update to the policy that says that smoking is not allowed in any room in which board meeting is held.
Questions or comments on that? Yeah. We do these as a group.
I think we have to vote on them next time. This is the
Say that
first
again?
read. I believe we vote next time.
Next
This
time.
is
It was just a
This is
first
for
read.
discussion. Good, thank you. All right, so this will be back for a vote at the next meeting. Thank you. So we move along to further discussion and possible action on board master agenda for August 2021, February 2022. Dr. Adams.
So this has been revised, actually, one of the, that includes actually pushing back a little bit the school psychologist, because originally the school psychologist was on here. At the end of the day, it just was not possible to collect the data that you would have wanted to collect in that time period. There were a couple of other suggestions, so if those would like to be put on the table, I'm happy to consider those. Well, the boards will be happy to consider them for any amendments to this.
There is one that has come up. It is the update or the expiration of the agreement on the DHS field and the lights.
Yep.
So that should be added to the agenda sometime in early October, as that expires, I believe, in January. That needs to be added. Mrs. Ackman.
Well, I'm just wondering, and given that you have that update as well, should we maybe push this off for action? Because we just asked for curriculum updates to also
Yep.
come in here and prior to budget. So maybe we should, I don't think it matters if we maybe push this one more meeting cycle. We could
Yep.
add in the lights renewal and we could add in
Yep.
a curriculum update if Mr. Tramberg thinks it's doable, or if he could come back and tell the board why it's not doable.
And
You
then
don't have to have an answer tonight. I'm just saying it would give us some time rather than
Yeah.
keeping amending the master agenda.
Yep, I'm fine with that. And then, Mr. Rudel, the only other thing that came up too, and I don't recall from our discussion, we were going to make some accounting changes to the student activity account in terms of gate receipts. Is that something that in the administration's view, we need more conversation on, or are you set with that being part of the upcoming budget cycle?
I think the, excuse me, I think the plan was to bring the student activity manual to the policy committee.
Yeah.
Right.
And then have those edits along with a couple other edits within
Okay.
that, and then it would go to the board.
All right, so that needs to be added to the agenda also. Mrs. McCammon.
Is the, forgive me if I'm just not seeing it, the enrollment, the enrollment projections that we talked about, usually they're Malone and McBroom, but we're doing just in-house. Is that in here?
I don't know that it is, Ms. McCammon, so if it's not, we'll add that in.
So we typically have those beginning of October?
Yeah.
October.
Yep.
It will be the superintendent's version.
Oh, like so many other years. Alan and I are going to keep going back and forth on this.
Good. Any other? Yes, Mr. Sini.
I think the FOIA review came up
Good
previously.
point. Good point. So we should build in a regular review of the FOIA log into the agenda, and I think one should be sometime this fall. Good. Anything else? And so let's move this to a decision for the next meeting, and anything else that comes up in the meantime, please let me know. Good. Thank you. We'll move on to action items, appointments, resignations, and retirements. Ms. Sion.
We are fully staffed with all of our classroom teachers. We continue to have some movement in the non-certified staff, but that's pretty typical.
Okay, great. Any questions or comments on the PAR? Great. I will move to accept the PAR. Motion, Mrs. Ritchie, second by Mrs. Achman. All those in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Brown. We will move on, Michelle, back to our public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. The facilitator will identify you. Please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Would you like to start with in person?
Yes, let's do it this time. So do we have any in person? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Lublin and I live at 24 Maplewood Drive. And I just had one comment tonight that I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Tranberg for his wonderful comments of support to our students today. I can't tell you how important that is as a parent to know that our school leadership will act in that way and go so far as to say publicly what they believe. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Katie.
Lori Olson, 16 Littlebrook Road. I just have a few comments. Thank you for having the curriculum discussion. Thank you for being considerate and civil to each other. It did strike me while I was in this meeting that some people were talking about this side and that side, and I just want to remind everybody in this room that we're all on the same side. We're all here because we're all on the same side. So thank you.
Thank you, Lori. We good on public, on in person. All right, we'll move to Zoom.
Username Sartori, you are recognized and unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Clara.
Yes, we can hear you, Clara.
Great. I just wanted to say that I'm happy that you decided on a curriculum subcommittee this evening. I just also wanted to point out, I heard some comments about previous curriculum committees being considered redundant. I was on a curriculum committee when I was on the Board of Ed for probably 8 years and under 4 superintendents, and never was there a complaint that the work was redundant. So I just wanted to point that out. The most important thing about the time on the curriculum committee was that it provided a time for a deep dive into what was being discussed as possible curriculum initiatives. And most importantly, it brought in the community into the process, because having the subcommittee meetings open to the public allowed for people in the community, parents, to come in and to express their opinion either publicly or even privately. And those thoughts were shared. Some things were presented as, I think opinions were always presented, but some ideas were taken into consideration and just made for a better process all around. So I did want to share that based on my experience. Thanks again for all your work. Good night.
Thanks, Clara.
Clara, would you remind us of your address, please?
Clara, do you just your address, please? We can get that.
We can find it.
I think it's Darien.
Yeah, I'm on the street.
Michelle.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, again, I want to thank everyone in the audience and everyone on Zoom. Mr. Tranberg, I will thank you again personally for your comments, and the board. Well done and well said. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the board conversation. May I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Sini, second by Mrs. Stein. Thank you all and have a good evening.